The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. This is page 266, the chapter, The True Story of the Boston Tea Party, excerpted from Unequal Protection. On a cold November evening, activists gathered in a coastal town. The corporation had gone too far, and 2,000 people who jammed into the meeting hall were torn as to what to do about it. Unemployment was exploding, the economic crisis was deepening, corporate crime, governmental corruption spawned by corporate cash, and an ethos of corporate greed were blamed. Why do we wait? Demanded one at the meeting, a fisherman named George Hughes. The more we delay, the more strength is acquired by the company and its puppets in government. Now is the time to prove our courage, he said. Soon the moment came when the crowd decided for direct action and rushed into the streets. This is how I tell the story of the Boston Tea Party now that I've read a first-person account of it. While trying to understand my nation's struggles against corporations, I came upon a first edition of a book titled A Retrospect of the Boston Tea Party with a memoir of George R.T. Hughes, a survivor of the little band of patriots who drowned the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773. And I jumped at a chance to buy it. Because the identities of the Boston Tea Party participants are hidden other than Sam Adams, and all were sworn to secrecy for the next 50 years, this volume, published 51 years after the Tea Party, is the only first-person account of the event by a participant that exists, as far as I can tell. As I read, I began to understand the true causes of the American Revolution. I learned that the Tea Party resembled in many ways the growing modern-day protests against transnational corporations and the small-town efforts to protect themselves against chain store retailers and factory farms. The Boston Tea Party's participants thought of themselves as protesters against the illegal actions of the multinational East India Company. Although school children are usually taught that the American Revolution was a rebellion against taxation without representation, akin to modern-day conservative taxpayer revolts, in fact, what led to the revolution was rage against a transnational corporation that, by the 1760s, dominated trade from China to India to the Caribbean and controlled nearly all commerce to and from North America, with subsidies and special dispensation from the British Crown. Hughes notes, the East India Company received permission to transport tea free of all duty from Great Britain to America, end of quote, enabling it to wipe out New England-based tea wholesalers and mom-and-pop stores and take over the tea business in all of America. Hence, Hughes told his biographer, it was no longer the small vessels of private merchants who went to vend tea for their own account in the ports of the colonies, but on the contrary, ships of an enormous burthen that transported immense quantities of this commodity. The colonies had now arrived at the decisive moment when they must cast the die and determine the course. A pamphlet called The Alarm was circulated through the colonies and signed by the enigmatic Rusticus. One issue made clear the feelings of colonial Americans about England's largest transnational corporation and its behavior around the world. Their conduct in Asia for some years past has given simple proof how little they regard the laws of nations, the rights, liberties, or lives of men. They have levied war, excited rebellions, dethroned lawful princes, and sacrificed millions for the sake of gain. The revenues of mighty kingdoms have entered their coffers, and these not being sufficient to glut their avarice, they have, by the most unparalleled barbarities, extortions, and monopolies, stripped the miserable inhabitants of their property and reduced whole provinces to indigence and ruin. 1,500,000, it is said, perished by famine in 1 year, not because the earth denied its fruits, but because this company and their servants engulfed all the necessities of life and set them at so high a price that the poor could not purchase them. After protesters had turned back the company's ships in Philadelphia and New York, Hughes writes, "In Boston, the general voice declared that the time has come to face the storm." The citizens of the colonies were preparing to throw off one of the corporations that for almost 200 years had determined nearly every aspect of their lives through its economic and political power. They were planning to destroy the goods of the world's largest multinational corporation, intimidate its employees, and face down the guns of the government that supported it. And so, as Hughes says, on that cold November evening in 1773, the first of the East India Company's ships of tax-free tea arrived in Boston Harbor. The next morning, a pamphlet was widely circulating, calling on patriots to meet at Faneuil Hall to discuss resistance to the East India Company and its tea. Things thus appeared to be hastening to a disastrous issue, wrote Hughes. The people of the country arrived in great numbers. The inhabitants of the town assembled. This assembly on the 16th of December, 1773, was the most numerous ever known, there being more than 2,000 from the country present. The group called for a vote on whether to oppose the landing of the tea. The vote was unanimously affirmative, and it is related by one historian of that scene, quote, that a person disguised after the manner of the Indians who was in the gallery shouted at this juncture the cry of war, and that the meeting dissolved in the twinkling of an eye, and the multitude rushed in a mass to Griffin's Wharf. That night, Hughes, blackening his face with coal dust, dressed as an Indian and joined crowds of other men in hacking apart the chests of tea and throwing them into the harbor. In all, the 342 chests of tea, more than 90,000 pounds thrown overboard that night, were worth, in today's currency, just over $1 million. Book, The Thom Hartmann Reader.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann is here with you. I am here with you. And it's Election Day. Now, everybody is focusing on Virginia as the main national race, kind of meta for the whole Republican-Democratic wars and whatnot, electoral wars. And, it's a big deal, the Virginia race, because Ed Gillespie started out as just your generic corporate Democrat. He's been a lobbyist. He's been, a big shot in the RNC. He's about as inside as you can get. And he is running as an outsider. He's changed in the last month or so, completely changed his shtick, and he's basically running as Donald Trump. He's talking about how Northam has a black lieutenant governor, and why is he not putting him in the ads? Like all of a sudden Republicans are concerned about black people, but it's just they are concerned. This is simply the Republican way of saying, hey, have you noticed there's a black guy on the ticket with him? You sure you want to vote for that? That's really the subtext of the ads, and I mean it's just insane. But anyhow, everybody's talking about that. My endorsement is in the Detroit race. And this is, yes, there's an election in Detroit today. And Garland Gilchrist, the second, who is a friend of mine, is running for city clerk, which is a big deal. And if you're in the Detroit area, this is my endorsement. Garland Gilchrist, he's brilliant. Syria has signed the Paris Agreement. Now, Syria is in the middle of a war, a civil war at that. They've got all these problems. And yet they had the time to say, yeah, we're with you on the Paris Agreement. Nicaragua had avoided signing it, but they were not signing it because they felt it didn't go far enough. It didn't have, strong enough sanctions in it and things like that. Well, it's got no sanctions. It's entirely voluntary. And that was Nicaragua's problem. They decided to go ahead and sign off on it anyway, just by way of saying, please don't misunderstand, we're not with Donald Trump in this. So there is now one country in the world out of I've gotten various numbers at various times, 192 countries in the world, 204 countries in the world, anyhow, roughly 200 countries in the world. There is one that says that they're not going to participate in the Paris Agreement because they think the science is wrong, and that is the United States. We are we are being run by an administration who, in order purely and simply to protect the profits of the fossil fuel industry, is denying science. This is nuts. I mean, this is like, it's like the Republican Party denying that there's diseases because they're being spiffed by some industry that's producing the disease. Oh, that's right. They did that back in 2000 when Mike Pence, when his family owned a chain of, it was called Tobacco Road, a chain of convenience stores in Indiana that principally sold tobacco. Mike Pence in 2000 wrote an op-ed saying tobacco doesn't cause cancer. So we've been here before. And now they're doing the same thing with guns. And you got Trump coming out saying, oh, if there hadn't been a good guy with a gun, the bad guy with a gun would have killed a lot more people. Lie. The bad guy with a gun left the church because he had emptied all the magazines he brought. He had shot every bullet he had. That's why he left. So yeah, I mean, it's a noble thing that a couple of neighbors came to the rescue of the people in the church. It's a shame they didn't get there while the shooting was going on, or maybe not. Because one of the things we know is that, well, for example, when Gabby Giffords was shot, there were two people in the crowd who were carrying concealed weapons with a legal permit. Neither one of them could get a shot at the shooter. And both of them, if they had just tried shooting wildly, probably would have killed more people. But it wasn't a good guy with a gun who stopped this. It was running out of ammunition. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that in the future mass killers never run out of ammunition. I mean, this guy only had 30-round clips, or magazines. He could have had 100-round magazines. Yeah, they're on the market. And in today's New York Times, there is an absolutely brilliant piece about how there is an absolute, linear, measurable, predictable relationship between the number of guns in circulation and the number of mass shootings. It's that simple. But Trump, he's going off on we've got a mental health problem here. Now, let me remind you, this is the headline from NBC News, February 28, 2017, as reprinted today on the top graphic up at the top of Democratic Underground. Trump signs bill revoking Obama-era gun checks for people with mental illness. So in February of this year, Donald Trump repealed President Obama's executive order that people who are mentally ill be included in the list of people who can't buy guns. People who are so mentally ill that they are eligible for Social Security disability insurance, which is a pretty high bar. So here's what Donald Trump had to say about this.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've talked
Audio,
about
Sean?
wanting to put extreme vetting on people trying to come
Here we
to
go.
the United States. But I wonder if you would consider extreme vetting for people trying to buy a gun.
Trying to what?
Buy a gun.
Well, you're bringing up a situation that probably shouldn't be discussed too much right now. We could let a little time go by, but it's okay if you feel that that's an appropriate question, even though we're the heart of South Korea. I will certainly answer your question. If you did what you're suggesting, there would have been no difference 3 days ago. And you might not have had that very brave person who happened to have a gun or a rifle in his truck go out and shoot him and hit him and neutralize him. And I can only say this, if he didn't have a gun, instead of having 26 dead, he would have had hundreds more dead.
No, that's a
That's the way
lie.
I feel about it.
Yeah.
And are you
Not going to help.
And are you considering any kind of gun control policy going
When you
forward?
look at the city with the strongest gun laws in our nation is Chicago. And Chicago is a disaster. It's a total disaster. Just remember, if this man didn't have a gun or a rifle, you'd be talking about a much worse situation.
So not
in the
true,
great state of
number
Texas.
one. And number two, Chicago has a problem with gun violence because Indiana, which is right on the edge of Chicago, Indiana sells guns to anybody. You know, it's just like, you know, Mike Pence made sure that was the case. So first he says, no problem selling guns to mentally ill people. Then he says, oh, gee, we've got a mass shooting here. It's a mental illness problem. But he's opposed to extreme vetting. Ted Lieu, a congressman from California, said, screw it, I'm out of here. They were doing a moment of silence in the House of Representatives yesterday. This is what the Republicans want when there's a mass shooting. They want silence. They want everybody to shut up. Don't discuss the fact that America having more guns means that America is going to have more mass shootings. It's just that simple. And it's not, it's, you know, we don't, this is an absolutely brilliant piece by Max Fisher and Josh Keller in today's New York Times. Why do we have so many mass shootings? And the usual suspects, but, you know, as posed by the Republican Party, are that we're unusually violent, that we have racial divisions, Chicago is code for that, or that we lack mental health care. None of those things are true relative to other countries. Other countries that don't have the gun violence problem that we have the same racial divisions, have the same violence level, and have, in many cases, the same mental health care. So what makes us different? The number of guns we have.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's absolutely solid. 4.4% of the global population is us, but we have 42% of the world's guns. And welcome back. Sarah in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Sarah, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, let me take you off speaker.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, gosh, you brought up another point. I mean, now there's just so many issues. I've been in the hospital for a month and a half, and now I'm, you know, it's the end of the month, and I'm now worried about, we just paid, you know, $7,000. We don't have another $7,000.
Oh, my. You're talking healthcare bills.
Yeah. But anyway, that's not what I called about. Okay. I got so upset about, I heard about this lady on Fox News talking about how grateful that those kids must have been to be killed in a church.
Right. Yeah, if you're going to go to God in a church.
And I thought, well, bizarre. You know, all these, what do you call those, Christian supremacist people?
Yeah, dominionists, I think they call themselves.
That's what I'm going to call them. Okay, so when, say, if you have an abortion, then, you know, all those children are in heaven, so what's your problem?
Right. You know, it's a real challenge, Sarah, trying to argue theology with any of these people, because ultimately
I'm not going to argue theology, and then I'm going to bring up one point, and I'm going to because I know there's a whole lot of callers trying to come in. The one thing, you know, we have property in Colorado, and the one thing that, you know, we have that we give all our guests says, you know, do not go on any other person's property, because somebody will come out with a rifle. Right. A rifle. And because you're trespassing,
and they can shoot you. Yeah,
they can shoot you. And the other thing in Texas, you know, you can't put more than 3 bullets in a shotgun to kill birds.
Yeah, it's called a duck load. It's in order to be sporting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Nobody needs an assault weapon for hunting. I mean, you know, in fact, if you went out in the woods with an assault weapon, you'd probably be laughed, you know, out of the woods by your hunting buddies. It's just pathetic what is going on here.
Jeff Flake was on The View yesterday, and Joy was Joy Behar. She was also discussing, you know, no one needs one of these, and he says, well, no, that's not true, and I'm like, right. You're still in politics.
Yeah, you need an assault weapon if you're, you know, in the middle of a war zone, but we haven't had a war zone in the United States since 1860.
Well, get ready for it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that's That's a scary thought, Sarah. But I would argue that what we're seeing in a way is a war. I mean, Americans are killing Americans to the tune of tens of thousands a year with guns.
I agree with you 100%. 100%. I agree with you.
Nobody else in the world is this stupid. It's just like nobody else in the world is denying climate change. There's literally not a single country on Earth that denies climate change, and there's only a couple of countries on Earth who have. Yemen actually has more guns per person than we do. Well, Yemen is in the middle of a war.
A war zone.
Yeah.
There's a war zone.
Exactly.
But, the thing is, I'll give you 3 points. No one in the world is denying climate change.
Yeah.
No one in the world has got the guns that we have, and no one in the world is denying health care.
There you go. Well said, Sarah. Thank you. We'll be back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news.
Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day,
every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. The Onion. The Onion. Why is it that The Onion is like our source of moral and coherent and rational? The headline, "No way to prevent this," says only nation where this regularly happens. Kansas resident Britt Mulvano says, "This was a terrible tragedy, but sometimes these things just happen, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop them." Echoing sentiments expressed by tens of millions of individuals who reside in a nation where over half of the world's deadliest shootings have occurred in the past 50 years, and whose citizens are 20 times more likely to die of gun violence than those of other developed nations. At press time, residents of the only economically advanced nation in the world, where roughly 2 mass shootings have occurred every month for the past 8 years, are referring to themselves in their situation as, quote, helpless, end quote. Well, it turns out we're not helpless. We could just do away with the guns, or at least as many guns. We have 4.5%. We are 4.5%, roughly a little less than 5% of the world's population. We have almost half of the world's guns, 42%. We're 5% of the world's population. We have 42% of the world's guns. Worldwide, they just did this, very straightforward analysis. This just very straightforward scientific analysis. Adam Lankford at the University of Alabama did this in 2015. And adjusted for population, only Yemen has a higher rate of mass shootings. Yemen, by the way, has the world's second highest rate of gun ownership after the United States. If mental health made the difference, they would show that Americans have more mental health problems, than people in other countries with fewer mass shootings. Turns out we're in line with all these wealthy countries in terms of the frequency of mental health disorders. Only 4% of American gun deaths can be attributed to mental health issues. Whether a population plays fewer or more video games, no impact whatsoever. It's not a violent culture. It's not a violent media. It's not violent video games. Racial diversity or other factors associated with social cohesion also show little correlation with gun deaths. Our homicide rate is, in 2009, last year we have numbers for, was 33 killings for every million Americans. 33 killings by guns. In Canada and Britain, it's 5 per million in Canada. In Britain, it's 0.7% per million. So Canada has about 700% more mass shootings, or gun homicides than the UK does. Canada, of course, has a lot of guns, but nothing like us. The United States was actually, and that doesn't account for it does account, for the gun homicide rate, the frequency of guns. A New Yorker is just as likely to be robbed as a Londoner, for instance, but the New Yorker is 54 more times likely to be killed in the process of being robbed. The authors, Max Fisher and Josh Keller, in today's New York Times piece, What Explains U.S. Mass Shootings? International Comparisons Suggest an Answer, write, more gun ownership corresponds with more gun murders across virtually every axis among developed countries, among American states, among American cities and towns when controlling for crime rates, and gun control legislation tends to reduce gun murders, according to a recent analysis of 130 studies from 10 countries. Now, there is one weird study published in 2016 that the gun nuts always cite. It's from last year, that says that the United States death rate, now they only looked at a 14-year period in this so-called study, and what they found was that our death rate by mass shootings was 1.5 per million people, but it's 3.4 in Finland. So more people in Finland die from mass shootings than in the United States, right? Well, wrong. There was one shooting, two mass shootings in Finland. There was one mass shooting in Switzerland during that period of time, in that 14-year period. One. So yeah, these are much smaller countries, and so as a percentage of their population, maybe more people were killed in a mass shooting. But in 14 years, Switzerland had one mass shooting. We're having one every month. Arguably one every week if you define a mass shooting as 4 or more people being killed. It just, they go through this. Switzerland has the second highest gun ownership rate of any developed country, but it's still half the United States. Their gun homicide rate, 7.7 per million, higher than any other European country. Of course, they have more guns than any other European country, but they have very stringent gun laws. Only Mexico and Guatemala were one of only 3 countries that start with the assumption that you have an inherent right to own a gun. In Switzerland and all these other countries, you can earn the right to own a gun, which seems pretty reasonable to me, right? Earn the right to own a gun. Demonstrate that you're competent.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And carry liability insurance. Yeah, just deal with guns like cars. We'll be back.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. This is from the prologue. Beginnings, it's said, are apt to be shadowy. So it is with this story, which starts with the emergence of a new species, perhaps 200,000 years ago. The species does not yet have a name, nothing does, but it has the capacity to name things. As with any young species, this one's position is precarious. Its numbers are small and its range restricted to a slice of eastern Africa. Still, its population grows, but quite possibly when it contracts again, some would claim near fatally, to just a few thousand pairs. The members of the species are not particularly swift or strong or fertile. They are, however, singularly resourceful. Gradually, they push into regions with different climates, different predators, and different prey. None of the usual constraints of habitat or geography seem to check them. They cross rivers, plateaus, mountain ranges. In coastal regions, they gather shellfish. Farther inland, they hunt mammals. Everywhere they settle, they adapt and innovate. On reaching Europe, they encounter creatures very much like themselves, but stockier and probably brawnier, who have been living on the continent far longer. They interbreed with these creatures and then, by one means or another, kill them off. The end of this affair will turn out to be exemplary. As the species expands its range, it crosses paths with animals twice, 10, even 20 times its size. Huge cats, towering bears, turtle as big as elephants, sloths that stand 15 feet tall. These species are more powerful and even fiercer, but they are slow to breed and thus are wiped out. Although a land animal, our species, ever inventive, crosses the sea. It reaches islands inhabited by evolution's outliers, birds that lay foot-long eggs, pig-sized hippos, giant skinks. Accustomed to isolation, these creatures are ill-equipped to deal with the newcomers or their fellow travelers, mostly rats. Many of them, too, succumb. The process continues in fits and starts for thousands of years until the species, no longer new, has spread to practically every corner of the globe. At this point, several things happen more or less at once that allow Homo sapiens, as it has come to call itself, to reproduce at an unprecedented rate. In a single century, the population doubles. Then it doubles again, and then again. Vast forests are raised. Humans do this deliberately in order to feed themselves. Less deliberately, they shift organisms from one continent to another, reassembling the biosphere. Meanwhile, an even stranger and more radical transformation is underway. Having discovered subterranean reserves of energy, humans begin to change the composition of the atmosphere. This, in turn, alters the climate and the chemistry of the oceans. Some plants and animals adjust by moving. They climb mountains and migrate toward the poles. But a great many, at first hundreds, then thousands, and finally perhaps millions, find themselves marooned. Extinction rates soar, and the texture of life changes. No creature has ever altered life on a planet in this way before, and yet other comparable events have occurred. Very, very occasionally in the distant past, the planet has undergone change so wrenching that the diversity of life has plummeted. 5 of these ancient events were catastrophic enough that they're put in their own category, the so-called Big Five. What seems like a fantastic coincidence, but is probably no coincidence at all, the history of these events is recovered just as people come to realize that they're causing another one. When it's still too early to say whether it will reach the proportions of the Big Five, it becomes known as the 6th extinction. The story of the 6th extinction, at least as I've chosen to tell it, comes in 13 chapters. Each tracks a species that is in some way emblematic. The American mastodon, the great auk, an ammonite that disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous alongside the dinosaurs. The creatures in the early chapters are already gone. And this part of the book is mostly concerned with the great extinctions of the past and the twisting history of their discovery, starting with the work of the French nationalist Georges Cuvier. The second part of the book takes place very much in the present, in the increasingly fragmented Amazon rainforest, on a fast-warming slope in the Andes, and on the outer reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. I chose to go to these particular locations for the usual journalistic reasons, because there was a research station or because someone invited me to tag along on an expedition. Such is the scope of the changes now taking place that I could have gone pretty much anywhere, and with the proper guidance, found signs of them. One chapter concerns a die-off happening more or less in my own backyard and quite possibly in yours. If extinction is a morbid topic, mass extinction is, well, massively so. It's also a fascinating one. In the pages that follow, I try to convey both sides, the excitement of what's being learned, as well as the horror of it. My hope is that readers of this book will come away with an appreciation of the truly extraordinary moment in which we live. And then jumping to page 15. The same way acoustical engineers speak of background noise, biologists talk about background extinction. In ordinary times, times here understood to mean whole geological epochs, extinction takes place only very rarely, more rarely than speciation, and it occurs at what's known as the background extinction rate. This rate varies from one group of organisms to another. Often it's expressed in terms of extinctions per million species years. Calculating the background extinction rate is a laborious task that entails combing through whole databases worth of fossils. And then she goes on to type mammals, it's about 0.25 per million species years. So on. The book, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Jerry in Woodbridge, Illinois. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I was talking about how this is a free speech station, right? I can speak my mind, right?
You may speak your mind, Jerry.
And it will go on TV, right?
You are.
It's not going to edit me out.
You are live right now.
Okay. Well, I couldn't believe a few minutes ago. I never thought about this, about the guns, about controlling the guns. That a woman said that the Christians, why do they care about abortions? Because the baby's just going to go to heaven anyway. I couldn't believe what that woman said.
Oh yeah, that's
so mean.
Yeah, that's the logic of her argument, I suppose, is that
is cool. That is, the doctors takes oath to save lives.
Yeah, yeah.
The military's there to save us, but yet I just keep hearing bad talk about them.
Yeah,
and then you talk about the only free country that we can have guns. What other countries are free like we are?
Right, right. Well, I would say, Jerry, that there are... Jerry, thank you for the call. I would say that there are a lot of countries that are more free than we are. And I just, and I think it's really important to just lay that out, that this whole freedom thing that Republicans are always talking about, what they're talking about is the freedom of billionaire polluters to pollute, the freedom of billionaire banksters to rip us off, the freedom of the fossil fuel industry to poison our planet, perhaps even leading to the death of our species. Those are the freedoms that they're talking about. Now, if you want to talk about freedom for actual, average people in the United States, you're not free if you're sick and you can't get health care or you can't afford to pay for it. You're not free. You're not free if you're working full time and you can't afford to even pay your damn rent. That's not freedom. That's a form of bondage. You're not free if you're not free if you're constantly living in fear that somebody's going to pop up and shoot you. I mean, there's so many dimensions of America where we are not free compared with the other developed countries in the world, where they don't have gun violence problems, where everybody does have national health care, where everybody does have a guaranteed pension retirement program. And I think it's really important to note that. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's up? Omar? No, Omar. Okay, let's try Patty in Sandusky, Ohio. Hey, Patty, what's on your mind today?
Two things that I'd like to talk about. First, of course, the article that you brought up in the New York Times. I think it really needs to sink into people that we are second to Yemen. I mean, that's just a startling fact to me.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I think if you look at what's going on now and you updated that data to include that in the last less than year and a half, we have had 3 domestic terrorist shootings. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that data is not included.
Right.
I look at when Congress allowed Ronald Reagan's repeal on these guns, the AR-47, the AK-47, the AR-15, and the large round clips. This is what is killing people.
Right.
Okay, yeah, Chicago has, problems, but they don't have domestic terrorists there. So that, I think, is when the big problem comes in, because people don't have the ability to go in and shoot 500 people at a time, shoot, 50 people like in this church at a time, without those type of guns.
Yep. Yeah, this guy went through over 400 bullets.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan banned them. The Republican Congress and Senate allowed it to lapse, which I was stunned.
Yeah, during the George W. Bush administration.
And if it's not taken care of, people need to understand that eventually these type of incidents are going to come to your community.
Yeah.
They need to call their congressmen, their senators, and demand that this ban is reenacted.
Yeah, this is why
I am a gun owner. I'm a Second Amendment person, but we do not need these guns.
Well said, Patty. Well said. Thank you. And spot on. I mean, Richard in Chicago. Hey, Richard, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? I'm also a gun owner that I think is very reasonable in my worldview. I think that the progressives have good points of view on certain things, and I think conservatives have good points of view on certain things. I wish you wouldn't call people gun nuts, because I think I would qualify for that if you saw that I had the guns that you don't like or want to limit. I don't own any AR-15s. I don't own an AK-57. I don't 47. I don't see any reason to own those guns personally. During the assault weapons ban, people were allowed to own AR rifles. They were allowed to own them all throughout that ban. What they did was they defanged them. They turned them into modern sporting rifles.
Right, they have to be single fire.
Rifles you know that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, if you allow me and you to sit down, and I'm going to take you as a person that would probably ban guns if he could.
No, I wouldn't.
Okay. I mean,
I've talked about this many times, Richard. One of my brothers is a sports shooting enthusiast, and has a range in his backyard. And whenever Louise and I go back to Michigan, we stay with this one of my three brothers. And if we're there over the weekend, we're always in the backyard shooting. I have no problem with, and the major downside of that, by the way, and as a gun owner, you know this, is that when you're done shooting, your hands are covered with lead powder, which means that every time you go out shooting, you probably lose a half an IQ point. But that said, no, I wouldn't want to ban them. I have respect for people who use guns for sporting purposes, like my brother does. I have respect for people who use guns for hunting, and I'm a vegetarian and have been since I was 17 years old.
I'm on my way to being a vegetarian.
So no, I don't think that guns should be banned. I think that we should have rational gun policies. There are people who, you've got, ranchers and whatnot who actually need weapons. You have, people. There's a lot of people in particular jobs where concealed carry is a reasonable thing. There are people who live in areas where they feel that they need a gun to defend themselves. I'm not opposed to guns. I'm opposed to stupid gun policies. We are 4.5% of the world's population. We have 44% of the world's guns. That's nuts, Richard. That's nuts.
But Tom, wouldn't that lead you to believe that Americans want to own guns?
No.
And to use rhetoric that you're going to take them away from
I never said take them away, Richard. You did. And I get this, trying to portray Democrats or progressives as anti-gun or want to ban guns or anything. I get that that's the main primary talking point that the NRA and their shills put out whenever they go on the air, whenever they have an opportunity. Oh, you guys just want to ban guns. And very often in a concerned troll fashion. Hey, I identify with your concerns, but I'm concerned that by trying to ban guns, you're really hurting yourself. That's BS, Richard. The reality is that most Americans don't want to own a lot of guns. There are many Americans who own one gun or 2 or 3 guns, but people who are owning 40, 50, 60, 100 guns, that's a very, very small percentage of Americans. The percentage of Americans who feel that their manhood is not complete if they don't have a very large weapon with a very large magazine, it's a very, very small percentage of people. But the power of the gun industry to buy legislators, now that the Supreme Court has said that it is okay for an industry to own individual politicians, the power of the weapons industry through the NRA to own it, here, Ted Cruz, they gave him $360,000. Marco Rubio got $176,000. This is just, top 20 recipients of the gun lobby from last year. Marco Rubio, $176,000. Paul Ryan, $171,000. Ron Johnson, $164,000. Rand Paul, $155,000. Pat Toomey, $79,000. Ryan Zinke, $79,000. I mean, the list goes on and on. By the way, they're all Republicans, the top 20 recipients of gun money. Because the gun industry, just like the fossil fuel industry, is a corrupt industry. The weapons industry in the United States is making money off Americans killing each other. And they want to make sure that anytime somebody like me tries to have a conversation with people like you about, maybe we should reconsider how we deal with guns in the United States. And Richard apparently doesn't know my position. I'm guessing he's not a regular listener to the show. Maybe, who knows? I mean, maybe the NRA said, hey, to one of their chief lobbyists, hey, call into this show and make these points. I'm over it. My position has been, and it has been for decades, and I continue to hold this position, that we should be as rational about guns as we are about cars. Cars can kill people, and in the 19-teens, we put laws into place when cars started killing people to minimize that, the probability of that happening. Number one, if you own a car, it's got to be registered. It's from the time of manufacture until the time of destruction. There's a clear chain of ownership. Number two, if you're going to use a car, you have to demonstrate you know how to use it safely. There's a driver's test. And number three, if you own a car and you're going to drive a car, you have to have liability insurance. Those three things should be applied to gun owners. Very simple, very straightforward. And then let the insurance market take care of this. If some guy, wants to buy, 5 AR-15s and 1,000 rounds of ammunition, let his insurance company decide if he's going to be a risk. Suddenly his insurance policy, just like with drunk drivers, his insurance policy, your liability policy on your car, you get a drunk driving conviction, your price is going to go from $200 a year to $2,000 or whatever. I mean, I've never had a drunk driving conviction. I don't know this from personal experience. But my understanding is that it explodes the price. I mean, it just makes sense, right? So there you've got an actual marketplace that is actually having some impact on on what's going on here. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. And welcome back. Paul in Benton, Pennsylvania, watching Free Speech on the Dish Network. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
I used to belong to a couple sportsmen's organizations, and I don't bother belonging to them anymore because one thing I found out is they're like these little right-wing enclaves. All these people are basically gun fetishists, and here in Pennsylvania, they even tried to get these semi-automatic rifles okayed for deer hunting, and the Game Commission held a hearing on it, and luckily the Game Commissioners voted it down.
Yeah.
But I don't see a lot of distinction between just regular people owning, having these guns and a lot of these sportsmen, because that's why they join a lot of these groups, because it's, it puts them in touch with like-minded, people and their guns.
Yeah. There are three industries that are doing this, Paul. You've got the tobacco industry, which they're not doing it so much right now, but back 15, 20, 25 years ago, before they got taken down in that giant epic lawsuit, the tobacco industry was funding groups around America, Proud Smokers. They actually started a group in the mid '80s during the Reagan administration called the Tea Party, and it was we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. We're sick and tired of you trying to regulate where we can smoke and when we can smoke, and we are the Tea Party. And that's where the Tea Party started. It was started by a division of the tobacco lobbying trade group. So the tobacco industry is doing this. The fossil fuel industry is doing this. And we're tough guys. We're fighting back. In the fossil fuel industry, it's like promoting the macho idea of big trucks and other vehicles that consume enormous amounts of petrol, of gasoline and diesel fuel. In the tobacco industry, you've got the tobacco companies, sponsoring this "we're fighting back" Tea Party thing. And now with the gun side, you've got the NRA. I was a member of the NRA up until 2008. And in that election, I was so sickened by the NRA's political involvement that I ended my membership. But yeah, I get what you're saying, Paul. It's not just that there's like some kind of weird fetish going on. It's like it's being encouraged by industry. And that's the thing that should be so concerning to us, is that we've become patsies. In the case of fossil fuel, tobacco, and now guns, we become patsies to industry.
Yeah, it's too bad. And another thing we're not addressing is the ammunition.
Right.
I mean, some of these, you could go out and buy like bulk ammo, 1,000 rounds of 223 caliber ammo for like, basically, pennies a round.
Right.
And I mean, the idea that people are stockpiling.
Yeah, and to extend the car analogy, Paul, you can't put a 1,000-gallon gasoline tank in your backyard. It's illegal.
Yeah.
So because it could blow up and take out your house and your neighbors' houses. Why then can you have thousands of rounds of ammunition in your home without notifying anybody, without letting the police know, without letting the local whoever handles toxic waste or fires? At least the fire department should know, right? This is the power of the weapons industry. Paul, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. We're just watching a repeat of an old story we've seen over and over again. I remember I was a kid. I think I was a teenager. Must have been during the 60s, that the guy who used to play Perry Mason's adversary on TV, he played, it's been a lot of years. He played the district attorney, basically, in the Perry Mason shows. And he died of lung cancer. And he was a heavy smoker. And he produced a couple of television ads where he said, I've got cancer and blah-de-blah, and, don't smoke. And the tobacco industry had all these people showing up on talk shows, on Oprah Winfrey kind of shows. This was before Oprah. Maybe it was early day Oprah, but I doubt she had any of them on. But you get what I'm saying. The tobacco industry had all these people on the air saying, well, maybe you got it from tobacco. Maybe you got it from something else. There's lots of things that can cause lung cancer. In other words, spread doubt. Our business is doubt. It's a phrase that came out of the tobacco litigation. So the tobacco industry does this. The fossil fuel industry is doing this as we speak about climate change. We are the only country in the world that continues to deny climate change. Literally the only one. Syria, as I noted at the beginning of the show, Syria has now signed on to the Paris Accord. We're it. Under the Trump administration and under Republican rule, Republican corporate rule, we have completely surrendered the extractive industries, the fossil fuel industries. Ryan Zinke wants to give them free access to Yellowstone and everything else. So you've got that. The fossil fuel industry is getting what they want. We are under their thumb. The tobacco industry is still largely getting what they want. None of their executives have gone to jail for lying to Congress, even though they did so under oath. Tobacco industry, it's billionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires. And now, of course, the weapons industry. And what does the weapons industry do? They're doing the same thing the tobacco industry did. Make people identify with your product. It's the first imperative. The same thing the fossil fuel industry does. Hey, let's sponsor NASCAR. Let's promote, big trucks, right? Big guy, yeah, tough guy, yeah. And so your sense of self-worth, your sense of identity is tied up with how rapidly you consume fossil fuels. I got a Dodge Ram. Or how much you smoke. I don't smoke those sissy cigarettes like Marlboros. Give me a Camel or a Pall Mall. Or how many weapons you have. I don't need no little, P-38 Walther P-30. Yeah, give me a real weapon. Give me an AR-15. No modified little imitation penis for me. I've got the big thing here, the AR-15 version. All right, this is what these three industries are selling to us. This is what the Republican Party sells to us because they are the party for sale to industry. And these are the lies and the weird non sequitur arguments that we are forced to live within. John in Chicago. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking the call. I just wanted to comment to the first people that were shot, that the gunman in Texas shot, were the two people standing outside that I presume were guards, and they probably had pistols on them, a concealed carry type of thing.
No, John, they weren't. They were just, no. If when you go to church, it's real. In fact, every time I've ever gone to church in my life, as I recall, which hasn't been a whole lot in the last few years, but was a lot for many years. There's always somebody who stands at the door to greet new people.
Well, I know my uncle's is a guard at the outside of his local church. And,
really? He carries a gun?
Yeah, it's an usher. He's an usher. He welcomes people with brochures, but he also has a little bit of heat with him. He could kill. But the point is, a pistol versus a rifle is who's going to win that thing.
Right.
The velocity. If it disembowels you, if you get hit, you get disemboweled by.
Right, and the two guys who chased this killer, the two guys who chased him, who are being characterized as heroes. If he hadn't shot every bullet he had, those two guys would probably be dead right now, because they tried going after a guy with semi-automatic weapons with hunting rifles, and it's just that's not a fair fight. Good point, John. Good point. Excellent point. Thank you, Steve in Phoenix. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Yes, Tom. I totally endorse your common sense ideas for gun control and insurance and such and registration. Any one of us could be the next one, and I'm concerned. I don't own a gun. I haven't shot one for 45 to 50 years in time here. However, with all the shootings going on and such, and the NRA, they've been advocating for pistols, rifles. They seem to be okay with the assault weapons and stuff. I wonder if it's going to come to the point here where they start saying, well, let people get tanks and stuff, because maybe the only way to stop a bad guy with a tank is a good guy with a tank.
Well, and tanks fall into the definition of arms, depending on whose dictionary you're consulting. But basically, arguably the Second Amendment protects your right to, if you buy the argument that's made by the Alex Jones crowd, that the Second Amendment was written so that if the government ever became oppressive, average citizens could take down the government, which, by the way, is not the case. No founder ever floated that argument. It will not be found, and I've read them. It will not be found in the Federalist paper. It will not be found, and I've read them in the deliberations at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. It will not be found, and I've read them in the debates in the states in the 1789 when they were ratifying the Constitution. Nobody ever made that argument. But if you accept that argument, and there's a lot of Republicans that do, then you have to say, well, in that case, then the founders meant, if we're going to take down an oppressive government, that we have the right to own an F-35. We have the right to build an Air Force base in our backyard. We have the right to own tanks. We have the right to own surface-to-air missiles. I mean, yeah, Steve?
It's totally out of control.
Yeah.
And that being said, in this day and age, the NRA in 2017, is it even relevant? Is it needed?
No, it's a lobbying organization. It's like Grover Norquist. He's the lobbyist for billionaires. He's a multimillionaire K Street lobbyist, but he's the expert on taxes, right? I mean, I guess that's the fourth industry that is scamming us, is the rich people hiding their money industry, which brings us to the Paradise Papers, which I haven't even gotten to ranting about today. Steve, thanks for the call, because there's so much else. In fact, we're going to debate gun control right after the break, and then I want to get into the Paradise Papers. This is an amazing story. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elizabeth Kolbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. This is from the prologue. Beginnings, it's said, are apt to be shadowy. So it is with this story, which starts with the emergence of a new species, perhaps 200,000 years ago. The species does not yet have a name, nothing does, but it has the capacity to name things. As with any young species, this one's position is precarious. Its numbers are small and its range restricted to a slice of eastern Africa. Still, its population grows, but quite possibly when it contracts again, some would claim near fatally, to just a few thousand pairs. The members of the species are not particularly swift or strong or fertile. They are, however, singularly resourceful. Gradually, they push into regions with different climates, different predators, and different prey. None of the usual constraints of habitat or geography seem to check them. They cross rivers, plateaus, mountain ranges. In coastal regions, they gather shellfish. Farther inland, they hunt mammals. Everywhere they settle, they adapt and innovate. On reaching Europe, they encounter creatures very much like themselves, but stockier and probably brawnier, who have been living on the continent far longer. They interbreed with these creatures and then, by one means or another, kill them off. The end of this affair will turn out to be exemplary. As the species expands its range, it crosses paths with animals twice, 10, even 20 times its size. Huge cats, towering bears, turtle as big as elephants, sloths that stand 15 feet tall. These species are more powerful and even fiercer, but they are slow to breed and thus are wiped out. Although a land animal, our species, ever inventive, crosses the sea. It reaches islands inhabited by evolution's outliers, birds that lay foot-long eggs, pig-sized hippos, giant skinks. Accustomed to isolation, these creatures are ill-equipped to deal with the newcomers or their fellow travelers, mostly rats. Many of them, too, succumb. The process continues in fits and starts for thousands of years until the species, no longer new, has spread to practically every corner of the globe. At this point, several things happen more or less at once that allow Homo sapiens, as it has come to call itself, to reproduce at an unprecedented rate. In a single century, the population doubles. Then it doubles again, and then again. Vast forests are raised. Humans do this deliberately in order to feed themselves. Less deliberately, they shift organisms from one continent to another, reassembling the biosphere. Meanwhile, an even stranger and more radical transformation is underway. Having discovered subterranean reserves of energy, humans begin to change the composition of the atmosphere. This, in turn, alters the climate and the chemistry of the oceans. Some plants and animals adjust by moving. They climb mountains and migrate toward the poles. But a great many, at first hundreds, then thousands, and finally perhaps millions, find themselves marooned. Extinction rates soar, and the texture of life changes. No creature has ever altered life on a planet in this way before, and yet other comparable events have occurred. Very, very occasionally in distant past, the planet has undergone change so wrenching that the diversity of life has plummeted. 5 of these ancient events were catastrophic enough that they're put in their own category, the so-called Big Five. What seems like a fantastic coincidence, but is probably no coincidence at all, the history of these events is recovered just as people come to realize that they're causing another one. When it's still too early to say whether it will reach the proportions of the Big Five, it becomes known as the Sixth Extinction. The story of the Sixth Extinction, at least as I've chosen to tell it, comes in 13 chapters. Each tracks a species that is in some way emblematic. The American mastodon, the great auk, an ammonite that disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous alongside the dinosaurs. The creatures in the early chapters are already gone. And this part of the book is mostly concerned with the great extinctions of the past and the twisting history of their discovery, starting with the work of the French nationalist Georges Cuvier. The second part of the book takes place very much in the present, in the increasingly fragmented Amazon rainforest, on a fast-warming slope in the Andes. and on the outer reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. I chose to go to these particular locations for the usual journalistic reasons, because there was a research station or because someone invited me to tag along on an expedition. Such is the scope of the changes now taking place that I could have gone pretty much anywhere, and with the proper guidance found signs of them. One chapter concerns a die-off happening more or less in my own backyard and quite possibly in yours. If extinction is a morbid topic, mass extinction is, well, massively so. It's also a fascinating one. In the pages that follow, I try to convey both sides, the excitement of what's being learned, as well as the horror of it. My hope is that readers of this book will come away with an appreciation of the truly extraordinary moment in which we live. And then jumping to page 15. The same way acoustical engineers speak of background noise, biologists talk about background extinction. In ordinary times, times here understood to mean whole geological epochs, extinction takes place only very rarely, more rarely than even than speciation, and it occurs at what's known as the background extinction rate. This rate varies from one group of organisms to another. Often it's expressed in terms of extinctions per million species years. Calculating the background extinction rate is a laborious task that entails combing through whole databases worth of fossils. And then she goes on to talk mammals, it's about 0.25 per million species years. So on. The book, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert.
We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us, Dr. Dennis Durrell. He is a physician, National Medical Director of Acute Services for IPC Healthcare. His website, Dennis Durrell, D-E-R-U-E-L-L-E, MD.com, DennisDurrell.com, MD.com. Dr. Durrell, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Do I understand correctly that you agree with Donald Trump that this shooting in Texas was a mental health problem and that it's too early for us to discuss the role of guns in our society?
Well, no, I wouldn't. I think it's always appropriate to discuss the role of guns and restriction of guns. However, I do agree that this was a mental health issue. This individual, again, reported through people that knew him, was on medication for mental health from 6th grade to 9th grade, referred to as over-medicated. And I think looking at his history, again, I have not examined him. I have not looked at his records. But looking at his history, he was showing signs of mental health issues all the way along his life. And therefore, the idea that we need,
So what?
Well, I think, again,
there are mentally ill people all over the world, Dennis. There are literally, from today's New York Times, if mental health made the difference, the data would show that Americans have more mental health problems than do people in other countries with fewer mass shootings. But the mental health care spending rate in the United States, the number of mental health professionals per capita, and the rate of severe mental disorders are all in line in the United States with those of all other wealthy countries. We are no different than the rest of the world in that regard.
Well,
however, the major difference between us and the rest of the world is that with 4.4% of the world's population, we have 44% of the world's guns.
Right, but okay, so let's just
it's like what you're saying. You're laying out a mitigating factor, right? Mental illness. Let's say the mitigating factor was drunkenness. Right? If gun shops and bars, if all bars had to have a gun shop in them, do you think we might start having a lot of shootouts in bars? I think so, because people are temporarily mentally disabled by being drunk. It's got nothing to do with the gun problem, though, or the killing problem.
No, it does, because look at the mass shooters. I mean, they have had red flags, and that's what we have to we have to identify them. Many of them have had domestic violence, and this one did too. And when you pair mental health with domestic violence, that's a red flag. And physicians,
that's a red flag for a lot of things, Dennis. That's a red flag for child abuse, for spouse abuse, for being dysfunctional in society. This is not why people are killing people.
Nobody's assessing. No. Nobody's assessing this. What is their risk of hurting someone
else? I don't
else?
understand, Dennis, why as a physician you're carrying water for the National Rifle Association, a trade association for an industry that manufactures products that only kill people, which is the opposite of your Hippocratic Oath.
No. I'm talking
yes.
mitigating.
You're shilling for the NRA here, Dennis.
No.
I don't get it.
I'm not. It has nothing to do with the NRA. We need to connect these databases. Okay, this individual fell through. This is a gun control issue. I'm for, quote unquote, limiting guns for people like him. I think that's very important. But here's the point. We need to assess when someone's been in the system, that we know they have mental health issues, we know they have domestic violence issues, and we can't connect the dots to keep a gun out of their hand, we have an issue. That's what I'm saying. Now, you can characterize that issue.
Well, in that case, then what are you suggesting? Hooking up the database? I mean, it's so imperfect.
Yeah.
If he had chosen to buy that gun at a Texas gun show, which doesn't have to check the database, he'd still have the same damn guns.
I got it, but that doesn't mean we don't start limiting it where we can. And the fact is that
why not limit it everywhere?
We have to start.
Why not, Dennis?
Somewhere.
Why not simply say, when cars came along in the 1880s, 1890s, and they became a big thing in the 19aughts and 19-teens, and somewhere between 1905 and 1915, we started putting into place rules about car ownership because cars were starting to kill people. They were going fast enough and they had enough mass, they were damaging people's bodies. And so we said you've got to register the car when it's manufactured, and you've got to maintain a constant chain of custody until it's destroyed, number one. Number two, you have to demonstrate your ability to drive this car safely. You have a driver's test, both written and do the work. And number three, you have to have liability insurance, which is a marketplace intervention. So when people regularly get in car accidents, or when people regularly get busted for drunk driving, their car insurance rates go from a few $100s a year to thousands, tens of thousands, or even impossible to get. So the marketplace restricts their access. These are common sense, rational things that don't impinge anybody's so-called right. Right? You've got a right to drive a car, you've got a right to own a gun, but you've got a right to assemble together and petition your government for redress of grievance. But you can't exercise that right without a permit from the police department. I mean, so why not just do something very straightforward that just takes on this issue of all these guns? 44% of the world's guns in the hands of 5% of the world's population? That's a prescription for disaster.
Well, that may be true, but I'm zeroing in on mass shootings and things like this. And if you look at those people and the individuals, they fall into pretty much a small group. They do have red flags. We need to connect the databases on those. And I think that would be the best way to start to begin to mitigate that. You're addressing a bigger issue and a bigger problem, and I'm specifically focusing on this issue.
I think we need to address this bigger issue. We've got a mass shooting every week in the United States. If you define a mass shooting as more than 4 people being killed, literally every week. And we've got, but beyond that, we've got 30,000 Americans. As an American,
see what they have.
Yeah, I mean this is.
We need to address that.
This is, again, this from today's New York Times. In America, crime is simply more lethal. A New Yorker is just as likely to be robbed. We're not talking mass shootings here. We're talking gun violence. A New Yorker is just as likely to be robbed as a Londoner. In other words, the rates of robbery in London and New York City are identical. But a New Yorker is 54 times more likely to be killed in the process. That's a 5,400% increase in the probability that you will die simply because there's more guns available in the United States than there are in the United Kingdom. That is the core issue, is it not?
Well, that's a different issue, and I think that is a problem.
Well, maybe we're talking about, maybe I misunderstood our discussion. I thought we were talking about, gun deaths in the United States and what to do about it. You want to exclusively talk about mental health?
Mass shootings, but, in general, I'm in favor of rules that keep the automatic weapons, I would limit them, so I'm going to be up front. I agree with that. Anything that limits access to that in general, I think is an okay thing to do. And I think we do have too many guns. But I don't think the answer is necessarily doing away with the Second Amendment. I think there are a lot of other things we can do in the meantime. But to me, mitigating these mass shootings has a lot to do with the red flags and picking it up and connecting the dots in our system. That's really where I'm focused.
In a 14-year period from 2000 to 2014, Switzerland had one mass shooting. They have the most guns per person of any country in Europe. They also had the second most mass shootings. Finland has the second most guns in Europe. They had 2 mass shootings during that 14-year period. To the best of my knowledge, no other European country had any. We had 133. The only thing, the difference in mental health rates between Switzerland, Finland, and the United States is unmeasurable. They're essentially the same. We have roughly identical rates of the percentage of people who work in the mental health field, the percentage of people who are diagnosed in the mental health field, the percentage of people who are imprisoned as a result of acting out, mental problems. I'm hitting a break here. I'm sorry. Anyhow, Dr. Dennis Durrell, it's been interesting talking with you. You can, his website, DennisDurrellMD.com, and you can tweet him at Dr. Durrell, DRDERUELLE. Dr. Durrell, thank you for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Meanwhile, the New York City Board of Elections is admitting they purged 200,000 voters from the rolls just before the last election. And welcome back. Garnett in LaPorte, Indiana. Hey, Garnett, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hello. Well, I would like to hear people's opinion on how President Trump is going to fix everybody that's on drugs and get rid of all the people that are on drugs. There's millions on drugs.
Did I miss something?
Variety or another.
Did I miss something? Did he say something about drugs in the last 24 hours that I missed?
He did a few days ago. He mentioned he was going to appropriate money to help all the people on drugs.
Oh, I see.
And get rid of the drugs in our country. Well,
right.
First place, it would depend on what kind of drugs you're getting rid of. I wouldn't want to see any old people have to go without pain medications and things because the drugs are so tight that they don't want to give them out.
Yep.
And at the same time, you've got people talk about mental issues. Most of these people on drugs usually have some kind of a problem they're dealing with in the back of their mind. Who knows what it is? It could be from childhood on to adulthood. And you have to get rid of the mental problems first before you're going to get rid of the drug issues.
Right.
Or possibly deal with the drugs directly.
And one of the...
Yes, sir.
And one of the things we know about those mental issues is that as inequality in a society increases, as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and the middle class gets wiped out, mental health problems explode. There's an absolute relationship between inequality in a society and mental health problems. So if we want to address mental health issues in the United States, we need to start by addressing our economic inequality issue.
And psychological problems with these young people that are on drugs. It's absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he's going to stop it because even if he sets up places for people to go, they don't have the money.
Oh, he's not. His whole "I alone can solve the problem. I alone can save America" is just, it's sick and twisted, but it's also a lie. Garnett,
I would like to know where the money's going to go. They're going to come up with a whole lot of money to do something he's going to do.
Oh, they'll send it to their buddies in the private prisons and the pharmaceutical industry.
I don't know. It's not going to help the people because they've got a minor help now if you want to stop drugs and things, but it's really not enough. I mean, they have to handle too many people in order to try to solve any problem.
Yeah.
There's just too many people on them, and he's got he's just pipe talking out of his head.
Yep. Yep. And doing so, basically lying to people and for political gain. It's pretty breathtaking, actually, how easily, with what facility Trump lies. But the whole Republican Party, I mean, they're like, oh, yeah, we've got a terrible opioid problem among white people in red states, right? So now, when it was black people in blue states, we've got a drug problem. Let's go in with the police. Let's give them SWAT teams. Let's give them bulletproof vests. Let's give them tanks and Humvees so that they can blow out entire apartment buildings. Let's double their kill power. But, as soon as it was like white people getting addicted, it's like, oh, wow, we've got a medical problem here. We've got to solve this medical problem. But then they don't even try to solve the problem. They just come up with platitudes and things. Garnet, well said. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A bunch of things here that I can't strongly enough encourage you to take this article from today's New York Times by Max Fisher and Josh Keller titled, "What Explains U.S. Mass Shootings? International Comparisons Suggest an Answer." To take this article and forward it, tweet it, Facebook it to everybody you know. This is the kind of, there's a reason why the Republicans passed a law 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, making it illegal for the federal government to compile statistics on gun crimes. Connecticut, after the god-awful horrors of the Newtown shootings, Connecticut started compiling gun data. Connecticut submitted that data a week or so ago, and now the feds are coming out and saying, hey, wait a minute, that's against the law. You can't compile gun data. Now, why would Republicans pass a law preventing states, towns, counties, any government entity from compiling data on gun deaths? Because they don't want us looking at it. They don't want us researching it. They don't want us to know this very simple equation. When 4.5% of the world's population has over 40% of the world's guns, you get a lot of mass shootings and a lot of gun homicides and suicides. Our gun suicide rate beats anybody in the world. Our gun homicide rate beats pretty much anybody in the world, at least the developed world, certainly. I mean, the only country ahead of us is Yemen. And Yemen, by the way, is the only country out there with as many guns in people's hands as the United States. So, good idea to do something about it. Okay, I mentioned the Board of Elections in New York. This is totally weird. New York City's Board of Elections will acknowledge it broke the law. This by Andrew Keshner in New York Daily News today. Will acknowledge it broke the law and be making serious changes in its practices, according to the proposed settlement of a legal fight over the purge of more than 200,000 voters from the city rolls. After many Brooklyn residents arrived at the polls during last year's presidential primary to learn that they had been deemed ineligible to vote, Common Cause filed suit. And Eric Schneiderman and the Brooklyn U.S. Attorney's Office joined the litigation. We still have yet to find out why did they illegally purge 200,000 people from the voting rolls and when. And was this done to influence either the primary election, which was the general charge that is made, or the general election? And I want to know the answers to these questions. But it doesn't seem like, there's any commitment to find us the answers to these. Chris Kobach, by the way, still committed to suppressing your right to vote. This from a piece by Orion Danjuma, staff attorney with the ACLU Racial Justice Program. And Orion writes, before Chris Kobach took office as Secretary of State, Kansans could register to vote the same way people do in virtually every other state in the United States, by submitting a sworn oath of citizenship under penalty of perjury. In 2013, Kobach implemented a law he pushed through the Kansas legislature 2 years earlier, requiring people to track down citizenship documentation, passport, birth certificate, or you can't vote. Large numbers of citizens, disproportionately minorities, don't have a passport or birth certificate in hand and don't have the money to obtain replacement documents. By December 2015, more than 35,000 Kansans had been disenfranchised, knocked off the voting rolls. 35,000, approximately 14% of all registration applicants since the requirement went into effect. Since 2015, 14% of all people who want to register to vote in Kansas are prevented from doing so by Chris Kobach's activities. Then Kobach says he wants to change the National Voting Registration Act, the NVRA. As unsealed documents show, he secretly prepared a draft amendment that would rewrite the NVRA. No evidence of non-citizen voter fraud? No problem. Chris Kobach's proposed amendment would grant him and officials around the country the power to impose any voter registration restriction they wanted, regardless of evidence or lack of evidence. Then the very day after Donald Trump won the presidential election, Kobach started peddling his amendment. Less than 2 weeks later, on November 20th, 2016, Kobach was photographed walking into a meeting with Trump, carrying his agenda, a bullet point in the plan: amend the National Voter Registration Act. Shortly after the meeting with Kobach, Trump tweeted that he would have won the popular vote if 3 million illegals hadn't voted. Right? Kellyanne Conway confirmed that Chris Kobach was the source of the information, the lie that Donald Trump tweeted. When the ACLU demanded that Kobach produce his draft NVRA amendments, he lied. He told the ACLU and a federal magistrate that no such document exists, trying to hide his lobbying. The magistrate fined him for, quote, making patently misleading representations to the court about the documents. He appealed, and the presiding judge agreed that Kobach should be sanctioned because of a pattern of misrepresentation that calls his credibility into question. Chris Kobach has been two courts have determined that Chris Kobach is a liar, an unrepentant liar. He's been struggling for months to keep these documents out of public view because his true goal is very simple. It's not to make our election system have more integrity. It's to prevent people from voting. Paul Wayrick said it back in the day. Our leverage in the election, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls and more. The news of the day right after this.
Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from a book by an old acquaintance and colleague of mine, Alan Colmes, who passed away this last year. The book is called Thank the Liberals. You're a liberal. If you think you're a conservative, that assertion is surely quite shocking. You may even be so upset upon reading this that you're considering either throwing this book down, shooting a hole in it with your shotgun, or even worse, burning it the way Florida Pastor Terry Jones burned the Koran. Or you may feel the need to toss this book aside even temporarily and find solace in your Bible. However, that's a fairly liberal book too, so it may not help you get any more comfortable than this one will. The very fact that you haven't done any of these things yet shows how open-minded you are. So don't disappoint and go all Terry Jones on me here. If right now you're saying, but Alan, there's no way I'm a liberal, Just do me the favor of hearing me out. Exhibit A, to prove my point that you're a liberal, maybe in conservative clothing, is that you're an American. If you're not an American, keep reading. You'll discover how great it is to be one. As an American, you're free right now to put this book down. Go outside for a walk, take a drive, or head to the nearest airport and fly anywhere in the world. Or you can stay home, go online, and get almost any information you want without it being firewalled by the government. And that's largely because liberals have stood up against such regulations as the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act, SOPA and PIPA, that would have squelched free speech on the internet and made criminals out of innocent content providers. This doesn't mean the government hasn't already overreached. When the government knows what websites you're going to because of the very unpatriotic Patriot Act, they're likely not paying too much attention to you and won't do anything about it. You want to leave your job, start a business, go to a food court, gorge out, just goof off. This is the land of the free, so go ahead after you're done with this book. America was founded on a liberal idea. The concept of a representative democracy without a state religion was a move leftward from the motherland, where the Church of England dictated certain laws and mores. Our forefathers thought that a state religion was repressive, and so they established one of our key tenets: freedom of and from religion. There can be no religious test to hold public office in America. That's liberal. A commander-in-chief who's a civilian, not a member of the military, it's liberal. Taxation with representation, that's liberal. A tripartite form of government where no one branch can rule over the others, yep, that's liberal too. Our founders, the ones conservatives revere so much, took these very liberal ideas and made them so much a part of our DNA that America is unthinkable without them. Let's look at some of the parts of our founding documents that often don't get enough press, but show how liberal we are simply because we're American. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lays out the rights of Congress, stating in part that they have the right to, quote, lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, end quote. But the government is specifically charged with providing for the general welfare of our population has been much disputed by conservatives. Over time, liberals have fought for numerous items that fall in this category that have greatly benefited Americans, programs conservatives forgot they initially opposed. You'll read about them later in the chapter, Have You Thanked a Liberal Today? Article 1, Section 8 also guarantees your right to your personal intellectual property by saying that Congress has the right to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. You invent something or write something, it's not the property of the government. This is why entrepreneurs and scientists flock to America. They know that here they are free to create and they will get the credit they deserve for their work. Our founding documents established a court system giving us a way to seek redress from grievances. The Constitution establishes the creation of various courts available for different purposes depending on the issue at hand. Congress has the authority to create bankruptcy courts and tax courts to handle specific issues. Article 3 says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish, giving us a federal court system and an appeals process. Article 1, Section 9 gives us the right to seek relief from unlawful imprisonment. A prisoner or someone on his or her behalf can petition for a writ of habeas corpus, an order from the government that it has the right to detain the person in question. This protects us from being held arbitrarily by the state without evidence and without just cause. Our entire judicial system outlined in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, is built on a liberal idea. The focus is on protecting the individual, especially the minority, from the tyranny of the majority. For example, the presumption of innocence, which is implied by the right to remain silent and the right to a jury, places the burden of proof on the prosecutor. The Fifth Amendment calls for grand juries to protect us from being prosecuted when there isn't enough evidence to bring a case against us. This amendment also guarantees that we can't be tried for the same crime twice, and that we are protected from having to testify against ourselves. This was originally written to guard against torture and forced confessions. Most important, we can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. If charged with a crime, there is a process in place to guarantee us a fair trial. This includes being given adequate notice to prepare a defense against those charges. The Fifth Amendment also contains the promise that the government can't take our property away without just compensation. We probably take all this for granted, but that's probably because we've never lived in a country where a terrifying knock on the door at 3 a.m. could mean a phony trial in a kangaroo court or a demand that we leave our homes because someone from the government needs or wants them. The Sixth Amendment continues the discussion of our judicial system through the promise that anyone accused of committing a crime has a right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of peers in the jurisdiction where the alleged crime was committed. You have the right to be told the charges against you, to confront your accuser in court, to have witnesses on your behalf, and to have counsel represent you. Thank the Liberals by Alan Hall.
Welcome back. It's 33 minutes past the hour, well, 34 minutes past the hour now. Alex in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. I'm just calling because I wanted to touch a little bit on that, on the gun issue. I'm a gun owner, and I believe that I was listening to you talk about how cars have insurance, vehicles, have insurance, and you wanted to kind of imply those same rules and laws on firearms, correct?
Yeah, it seems like a very common sense thing, and I've never met a gun owner who thought that that was a bad idea, frankly. At least what I would consider a rational gun owner.
Well, the problem with that is, though, it's going to get too expensive for your average gun owner, and I feel like a gun owner should be able to defend their families if they shouldn't have to struggle to afford it. Is what
the
I'm
reality,
trying to say.
Alex, is that if you own a gun to defend your family, you're 5 times more likely to kill your family than to defend them. You're more likely to commit suicide. You're more likely to kill each other. You're more likely to kill somebody else than you ever are to actually defend your family with that gun. The price to society of having 44% of the world's guns in the hands of 4% of the world's population, the price to society is roughly 30 to 40,000 Americans dead every year. Americans dead that wouldn't be dead in other societies that limit access to guns, and which is what I'm proposing. And so, yeah, you're saying it'll get expensive. You're going to have to pay some insurance. You're going to have to pay for your license, for your exam. I get that. And if you want to lay the expense of 30,000 dead Americans on my shoulders every year, my tax dollars paying for those people in Las Vegas and in Texas who didn't have insurance, who are now in the hospital, my taxes paying for the lost productivity of those people and their families, my taxes paying for the treatment of their children's PTSD. If you want to lay that on me, I'm going to lay on you, as a gun owner, the requirement to buy insurance and to go get that license. Yes, there will be an expense associated with it. It will not be onerous. You can afford to buy insurance for your car. Insurance for your gun is going to be a hell of a lot less expensive. I'd be amazed if it was $20 a month, or maybe even less than that. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. Hey, Marta, what's on your mind today?
Well, you always inspire me to do a little research. I also want to credit Democracy Now! This morning I heard an amazing report about the link between domestic violence, not mental health, and mass murders.
Yes.
And so I did a little research, and I also did what you always say, which is to take action. I called my congressman and asked, what are you doing? And was told he signed some bill about mental health. And I stopped her and I said, the American Psychiatric Association yesterday said this is not a mental health crisis, and it's disrespectful to accuse mentally ill people of that. So I decided to do a little research based on especially what I found on Democracy Now! Or what I heard. Fact, not myth. Every day, 3 women die at the hands of an intimate partner.
In the United States?
Very few die in mass shootings. Handguns are responsible for almost all killings. And 54% of mass shootings are directly related to 54% of mass shootings are somebody that has domestic or family violence issues.
Right. And
the vast majority of mass shootings take place inside private homes.
Yeah, I think you're making my point, Marta. If you ran an insurance company that insured gun owners for liability, and you learned that a particular gun owner had been arrested for beating his wife up, I'm guessing that you would jack up the price on their insurance for their gun.
Absolutely. And I also want to do a little more research at the link between how many of these mass shooters had experienced abuse of themselves as children.
Yeah.
Um,
But again,
and I'm-
Marta, like the American Psychiatric Association said, let's not blame this on mental health, because it's not a mental health issue. The United States has the same percentage of mental health issues
Right.
and crises as every other developed country. We're not outliers in that regard. The only area where we are outliers is how many guns we have. We have almost half the world's guns in one country with 5% of the world's population. That's nuts. If you walked into a bar and there were hundreds of scorpions running around loose, you think there's a chance you might get bit by a scorpion or stung by a scorpion? I mean, it's just, we've got millions of guns. We've got more guns than people in the United States. And outside of Yemen, we're pretty much the only country that's like that. Marta, I got to move along, but thank you for sharing your information with us. Well done. Robin in Gardiner or Gardiner.
Yes, hi.
How do you say it in Maine?
Gardner.
Gardner.
It's Gardner.
Okay. So what's up, Robin?
Yes, hi. I was actually calling about Medicare, but I want to make one point about the shooter.
Mm-hmm.
He made it into the military.
I beg your pardon?
They accepted the shooter into the military.
I still don't. You said it really fast, and I missed a word. Yeah.
The shooter was accepted into the military.
He was accepted in the military, but he was also kicked out of the military for being crazy,
into it.
for attacking his stepson.
Correct. My point was he was accepted in the military. I actually was calling about Medicare.
Okay.
I hear a lot about Medicare for all, Medicare for all, Medicare for all. I'm on Medicare. I'm a disabled person. I am not a senior citizen. I don't get any money from Social Security because I work for the state of Maine. There's an offset there, so I don't get any money from Social Security at all. And I paid $1,500 for Medicare last year.
Right.
Now, is that going to be the factor here? Is Medicare for all? Are we going to pay that kind of money for it?
I'm guessing that if everybody in the country was insured, it would be a heck of a lot less expensive, because the whole rationale for Medicare in the first place, the way the Lyndon Johnson administration sold Medicare to the health insurance industry, who were behind this, they supported putting Medicare into place, was we will take off your shoulders, insurance companies, the burden of caring for people during the most costly part of their lives, which is typically the last, 5 to 20 years of their lives, post 65 years old.
I'm not a senior citizen. I'm disabled.
No, I get that. But what I'm saying is that, oh, no, I didn't get that. I'm sorry. So I
paid $1,500 for Medicare last year.
Right. No, okay. Well, I'm still, my logic still holds, Robin. You are the exception to the rule. The vast majority of people on Medicare are over 65. And so they are the most expensive population. So you are buying into an insurance plan that only insures people who are really expensive to insure. So it's going to cost more than an insurance plan that covers everybody in the country, including, probably over 100 million people who don't see the doctor even once every 5 years, who are in their 20s to 40s or teens to 40s or whatever. So, Medicare for all would be considerably less expensive than what you're paying.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know, because, this Medicare for all, and I'm paying this kind of money for Medicare?
Yeah, well, $1,700 a year, first of all, is pretty cheap.
Well, not for me.
I understand, but like I said, that's $1,700 a year that you're paying into the most expensive. It's not the most expensive insurance in the United States, because Medicare is only skimming 2 to 2.5% off the top to pay for all their administrative expenses.
Yes.
But so the most expensive insurance would be coming from a for-profit company that's skimming 20% off the top for their profits, right? So, but nonetheless, Medicare is dealing with the most expensive population. And because they're dealing with the most expensive population, that's the situation. Robin, I got to move along. Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Well, hi, Tom. I'm supposed to be back at our hunting shack after showering and checking on our cat. And trying my best to wing it rather than having something written out. But I wanted to make an amend to Tony. Last week I had spoken about giving out pamphlets for Move to Amend and reaching down and saying I understood the black people And I didn't. I meant to say I'm attempting to understand. Sure. But anyway, I'm really calling in about, we had a Friday we called Brunch with Bernie, and now we don't have that any longer. And it seems to me that what I hear people talking about, all these people on your program, all have things, ideas, very important things, and it all seems to stem around our Constitution and what that
So, Jill, what's
is.
your point? I forgive my hurrying you, but we
have
only
a brunch
we have
with
less
the
than a minute.
Constitution on Friday.
Brunch with the Constitution on Fridays?
Rather than brunch with Bernie. We used to have brunch with Bernie.
Well, Bernie's moved on. He's got his own show. You know, he's doing
I know. I'd
doing
like
it on
to have
YouTube.
brunch with the Constitution.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting
and talk
idea.
about the 28th Amendment.
Yeah. You mean the 25th Amendment? Oh, the 28th. You're talking about the amendment to take money out of politics and
absolutely
stop corporations from being people.
Yeah, brunch with the Constitution.
Yeah.
And
well, it's an idea,
that
Jill.
Mean?
It's an idea. Let me ponder that and let me kick it around with my compatriots here. Thanks a lot for the call, Rick in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Oh, hey, Tom. Just thought I'd let you know. I think the main problem is that in the face with this gun control talk and in the face of overwhelming evidence and facts, all you get is an irrational rebuttal. I commend Marta for calling in with her statistics and figures, but it's absolutely crazy that if there was a disease out there called broadbandia that was killing 60, 80,000 people a year, you'd think the CDC would be all over it. They would find ways.
We'd be freaked out. Look at Ebola. Rick, thanks for the call.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day. Well, we're going to check in with Talk Media News, in fact, in just a moment. And welcome back. Gary watching Free Speech TV in Kingmont, West Virginia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
America, I'm going to rant too. America, the most violent industrialized nation on this planet, it's getting worse. So you're right. It's so pathetic. You're right. It's so stupid. And it's more than that, actually. Not to take away from what you said and what I said, it is that we continue to be our own worst enemy. Why are we so stupid about it? So much smarter people than me. Why are you people? Why are you fellow Americans so stupid about all these
Gary,
guns?
it's because we're being kept stupid. Our media has gone along with this lie. If you're talking about the gun violence, our media has gone along with this lie that the NRA and the Republican Party, which is owned by the NRA, have been promoting for the better part of 30 years, that guns don't kill people, people kill people. The reality is guns kill people. That's what they're built for.
Well, they have what I call a selfish and pathetic argument.
Okay.
So what is before I go? What's driving this behavior in America?
Profit.
What's driving it? It's greed, ego, and lack of a great deal of humility in our culture.
It's profit in a capitalist system that's out of control, Gary. That's what it is.
Well, it's also right. Well, that's part of. Well, when you're not humble enough as a human being, what are you going to do?
Well, I think it has to do with the rules of the game. I mean, if you're a really, really good baseball player and you find yourself on a football field, you're going to have a challenge, right? The rules of the game define who wins and who loses to a pretty substantial extent.
Well, maybe that's what the problem is.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The rules of the game have been rewritten to benefit rich people and corporations and to screw working people and poor people.
But that's what I'm saying.
Then we're agreeing.
You got to have money. When you have money, it's okay to be successful and have money, but you have to have humility with it.
Well, you don't have to, but it's probably a wise thing and psychologically a healthy thing.
You should.
Yeah. I don't disagree. Gary, I'm gonna move along. Your point is well taken. Thank you. Harold in Springfield, Ohio. Hey, Harold, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'll be brief. Today's a voting day in Springfield, Ohio, and Clark County, Greene County, Ohio, and all over Ohio. And I have concerns about some of the issues, but I'm not hearing nothing from my local politicians about how to vote or what to vote for or on the issues. Issue 2. I mean, I did hear something from Bernie.
Yeah.
He was saying to vote yes for issue 2.
Yeah.
But today the Democratic offices in Greene County and Clark County, they're closed, and they don't open up until except Thursdays through Saturdays from 10 to 4.
Well, that's strange.
I mean, how can we get good representation from our local politicians and our state politicians if you can't hear from them, if you can't make contact with them?
Yeah.
I mean, I used to be pretty impressed with Senator Brown, but gosh, we never hear nothing from him unless he's running again. Sherrod Brown. But
yeah, well, Sherrod Brown does a good job.
I kind of hope he'd be a
Harold. If anything, what you're saying convinces me that it's more important than ever to do what I'm constantly asking people to do, which is get inside the party, become a member of the party, change things from within, make it a party that is responsive. Harold, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. And speaking of the aforementioned Ellen Ratner, here she is. Ellen, what's going on in the world today?
Well, before I go on with my news, I do have to ask you, what do you think of the Second Amendment where it says a well-regulated militia?
You know what I think about this. The Second Amendment was in place as part of for two reasons. Number one, to preserve the slave patrols in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia. And number two, to assuage the concerns of people from Virginia up to Massachusetts, some of the more powerful legislators of the day, that standing armies during time of peace are what overthrow governments, democratic governments, republics. And so they wanted the standing army to be minimized and replaced by basically the state militias. I mean, we call them National Guards right now. That's my opinion.
Right. Well, I always like you to hear your opinion, even though I know what it is, because I really want everybody to hear your opinion, because I think it's brilliant. Okay.
Thank you, Ellen.
There are elections today, as you heard from your callers and from everybody else. The main two races are the governor's race in New Jersey and Virginia. The governor's race in New Jersey is expected to go to the Democrat. The governor's race in Virginia is up for grabs. And it's interesting because, of course, the head of the Democratic Party, Terry McAuliffe, is the current governor. It's you get one shot at it. It's not you can't take it for two terms. And now Ed Gillespie, who used to run the Republican National Committee, is running. He might win. And if that's the case, they're saying because Hillary Clinton won Virginia with so many points that it's going to cause the Democratic Party to take a look at what it's doing. So
well, yes and no, because, I mean, Ralph Northam was a very conservative Democrat.
That's right, and he's the lieutenant governor.
Yeah, he is not a Bernie-crat. He's a very middle-of-the-road Democrat. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I would vote for him in a heartbeat. He's a decent man, and he's got good positions. But to say that if he loses, that should cause the Democratic...
Well,
see, the subtext of what you're saying, Ellen...
report the news.
Yeah, but the subtext of what you're saying, this language coming out of out of some of the professional Democrats, is that if he loses, the party needs to turn right. And I would say if he loses, the party needs to turn left.
I think the party needs to go back to Bernie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not back to Bernie. It's back to FDR and LBJ.
Well, exactly. And what they represented when the good part of them was represented. As you know, LBJ did the Vietnam War, and FDR did the St. Louis, which was turned back, and a third of the people were killed. So they're not 100% perfect, but they did have the right view in terms of social agenda.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, or I should say the correct view, not the right view.
Thank you.
Okay. There are also some ballot initiatives that are worth taking a look at. One has to do with Medicaid expansion in Maine. The governor has turned it down, but now it's on the ballot. The other has to do with drug prices in the great state of Ohio and whether they should only pay what the VA pays for drug prices, which a lot of people think is the correct one. And in Texas, they have a tax exemption for disabled vets, not veterinarians, veterans, and that will be coming up as well. Now, also, I was on a conference call today where they have filed an amicus brief in federal court on the emoluments clause. Now, I know you know more about this than any human being on the planet, but basically what they're saying is that Donald Trump, through his personal business, is benefiting, and this is against the emoluments clause of the Constitution, that in fact he's in China this week, and the Chinese government, through one of their corporations, basically rents space from the Trump administration, that is an emolument violation, and that they have filed some Friends of the Court briefings on this.
Which group is going after Trump on this?
Well, it's the Constitutional Accountability Center, but they're using Senator Richard Blumenthal, they're using Harold Koh from the Yale Law School, they're using the University of Georgia Law School, they're using former government ethics officers, they're using many different groups who have pulled together, including 200 current and former members of Congress.
Fascinating.
Now, there's also a report out that the president has assured South Korea, and when he was in South Korea, on North Korea, saying, I think we're making a lot of progress. Of course, that's not what he said before, but that's what he's saying in Asia. And also there have been some people who have left North Korea who are saying basically that babies have been born deformed who have been in the area of nuclear testing, and the people were not warned about this. Now, it's very interesting. I'm from the great state of Ohio, from the Great Lakes, and I have thyroid disease. Well, they were able to iodize the salt in 38 or 39, but what we have heard via the grapevine, although I can find no reference to this on the internet, that they basically did nuclear testing around the Great Lakes in the 40s and 50s, and that's why so many people who grew up in the Great Lakes area, women in particular, have thyroid disease. Old bats have thyroid disease.
Yeah,
but of course we can't find any references to that.
Well, look at the downwind plumes from the western above air blasts in the 1950s. And maybe even early 60s. A lot of those plumes, I've seen maps of those that show the radioactive material. This is the stuff that killed John Wayne, coming, and that was in Idaho, as I recall, coming over Michigan. I mean, Louise and I grew up in Michigan, and Louise also has the thyroid thing where she's got to take the thyroid supplement, hypothyroidism.
Right,
and
we all do.
Yeah, which is an epidemic among middle-aged women who grew up in the Midwest. There's also a theory that that people in the Midwest are more likely to eat fish out of the Great Lakes, which don't have iodine in them, as opposed to seafood, which does have iodine. But, who knows? But I think that, the nuclear blast theory from the 50s, it would be interesting to see what the epidemiology is happening. If women who were born after, say, 1980, 1990, when that testing stopped, if they're having the same frequency of hyperthyroidism that women who
that would be very interesting. We'll get an epidemiologist on that topic.
Yeah. Okay. Sean, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Ellen Radner. Thank you so much, Ellen. We'll be back.
You got it.
I was not hearing the music.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. We're reading today from Jesse Eisinger's new book, shall we call it the Chicken Poop Club? Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. This is from the introduction. It's from page 15 in the introduction. Boom, bust, and crackdown. America's economic history is unfolded in a series of booms, followed by busts, followed crucially by crackdowns. After the stock market crash of 1929, congressional hearings channeled public outrage and resulted in landmark laws regulating Wall Street and creating the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. A few years later, a new SEC helped put the head of the mighty New York Stock Exchange in prison. Though inconsistent, the SEC over the intervening decades emerged as one of the most respected government regulatory bodies. The SEC is the most important corporate regulator, overseeing publicly traded companies in the nation's capital markets, money markets. The agency has civil powers, must team up with the various offices of the Justice Department when a securities laws violation turns into a criminal investigation. After the go-go years of the late 1960s, the SEC worked closely with the Southern District to take on top law firms, top accounting firms, and top executives who had helped perpetrate corporate frauds. After the savings and loan scandals of the 1980s, when hundreds of small banks across the country failed due to reckless real estate loans, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 1,000 people, including top executives of many of the largest failed banks. After the Michael Milken-run junk bomb boom and blow-up of the late 1980s, prosecutors spent years digging up evidence of stock manipulation and insider trading at major investment banks and law firms, prosecuting some of the most powerful Wall Street figures of the era. In the early 2000s, the NASDAQ bubble burst. The NASDAQ bubble revealed a corporate book-cooking pandemic. Top officers from giants such as Enron, WorldCom, Quest Communications, Adelphia, and Tyco International ended up in prison. Recklessness and stupidity fuel booms, but usually so do crimes. By contrast, after the 2008 financial crisis, the government failed. In response to the worst calamity to hit capital markets and the global economy since the Great Depression, the government did not charge any top bankers. The public was furious. Bank bailouts and a lack of consequences for banksters radicalized both ends of the political spectrum and gave rise to two of the most potent social movements of our time, Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Anger about the lack of Wall Street accountability seeded disenchantment with Obama. The 2016 insurgency of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who challenged frontrunner Hillary Clinton almost to the doors of the Democratic Convention, demonstrated the anger that remained on the left years after the apex of the crisis, undergirding mistrust about Clinton. She had given friendly, fateful, and highly compensated speeches to investment banks. While a Republican president had presided over the crisis and a Democratic one had saved the financial system, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Democrats could not claim to be the protectors of the working class and the scourges of investment bankers. That was due in large measure to the lack of corporate prosecutions. According to the Wall Street Journal, analysis of 156 criminal and civil cases brought by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission against 10 of the largest banks on Wall Street since 2009, in 81% of the cases, the government neither charged nor even identified individual employees. In the remainder, the government only charged 47 low and mid-level employees. Merely one was a boardroom-level executive whom the SEC charged civilly rather than criminally. In his own incoherent and superficial ways, Donald Trump rode anger about Wall Street throughout his campaign, railing at the bank's power. He closed his campaign by hinting poisonously about a cabal of global bankers rigging the system. He assailed politicians who were owned by Goldman Sachs, Trump's word. His first Ted Cruz in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general. The Republican platform called for breaking up the big banks by returning to the Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that splits commercial bank from investment banking, a reflection of resentment about the government bailout of the financial system as the bankers wriggled free. No sooner had Trump taken office, though, than he rushed to stuff members of that cabal into his White House and cabinet. He and Goldman alumni who advised him moved within days of taking office to unravel Dodd-Frank and loosen restrictions on corporations generally. It's commonplace to observe that no top bankers from the top financial firms went to prison for the widespread malfeasance that led to the 2008 financial crisis. It's such a socially acceptable opinion that no less than an inside-the-beltway figure than the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said, after he was safely out of office, that more bankers should have gone to prison. The problem is worse than that. Today's Justice Department has lost the will and indeed the ability to go after the highest-level corporate wrongdoers. The problem did not begin in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, and it has not ended. Prosecutors don't simply struggle to put executives for too big to fail banks in prison. They also cannot hold accountable wrongdoing executives from a gamut of large corporations, from pharmaceutical to technology to large industrial operations to retail giants. And, the book goes on from there, laying out exactly who and how and why. It's extraordinary. The Chicken Beep Club.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Paradise Papers. This is a huge story, and it's one that we, frankly, in my opinion, need to be paying some serious attention to. Tom Perez is with us. Let's jump to that. Tom Perez is on the line, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, the former U.S. Secretary of Labor, former secretary. Democrats.org is the website. Tom Perez is the Twitter handle. And Secretary, welcome back to the program.
Hey, great to be with you. Please call me Tom, and it's great to be with you and your listeners once again.
Thank you, Tom. So, general chaos in the Democratic Party is how this whole Donna Brazile thing is being characterized in the media. We also have this story today that the election officials in New York City are pleading guilty to having knocked 200,000 people off the voting rolls. I remember back during the primaries, there were concerns that the rolls were being purged in heavily progressive parts of New York. I don't know if there's any connection between those two things. What's going on inside the party, and how much of this, hand-wringing is just hyperbole that's being put out to characterize us poorly?
Well, Tom, I've put 700 miles on my car over the weekend in Virginia. I've stopped at, I can't even remember, 20, 25 different venues, and I never once was asked about Donna Brazile.
Yeah.
What I was asked about is how do we move forward and win Tuesday? We've had an unprecedented ground game in Virginia, unprecedented partnership. Remarkable unity. You remember there was a primary there, and people tried to write the story. Oh my God, it's going to be another proxy battle. And here's what turned out in the primary. Tom Perriello and Ralph Northam ran a spirited campaign on the issues. It was a high road campaign, and when Tom didn't win, he immediately pivoted to endorse Ralph, and that spirited campaign resulted in record turnout. Now look at the run-up to the election today. Twice as many, over 1 million door knocks during the course of the GOTV effort, twice as many as Terry McAuliffe 4 years ago. And Terry did a great job. more than the Hillary campaign. Fairfax County this morning, the concern there is that they're running out of ballots. That's a good concern. They're going to get more because we've been able to turn record turnout. The focus for everybody I met this weekend was how do we make sure that we don't have a Donald Trump clone in Virginia? How do we make sure we get access to health care? How do we make sure that people get a quality public education? How do we continue the economic development under Governor McAuliffe? And that's the same thing folks are hearing in New Jersey. They want movement forward. And my singular focus has been on building a Democratic Party that leads with our values, that is inclusive and wins elections. And I think we're poised to do well in a number of key races today.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I think it's marvelous that you have, done such a, you're doing a great job pulling this party back together, and broadly speaking, there's a lot to do, but I don't think we can be like Republicans in climate change and just not discuss this. This is a problem inside the Democratic Party right now, where you've got people who are losing their enthusiasm because they're concerned that the party is not necessarily always representing their interests. I'm saying this in a very poor fashion, Tom, but
no, hey, Tom, I get your point, and we have. I'll be the first to admit that we have to earn the trust of everybody, and I'll be the first to admit that the DNC didn't put its best foot forward in 2016, and because of that, we have trust gaps, and we've got to. Trust isn't something you get because you win an election. It's something you have to earn. And the first thing I did, you may recall, when I had the privilege of getting elected, is I asked Keith Ellison to join me because it wasn't about Keith or Tom. This was about making sure the Democratic Party is together. And that's been my North Star every day. How do we lead with our values? How do we get back to our basics? We stopped organizing on a regular basis. We were good at mobilizing, that sprint to the finish line, but we stopped building those long-term relationships with voters, and our renewed commitment to organizing. Our new motto is every zip code counts. Our new mission statement is we're here to elect Democrats up and down the ticket from the school board to the Senate. That's why I was campaigning over the weekend with House of Delegates candidates in Virginia, because the best way to flip the House of Representatives in Washington is to flip more state legislatures so that we don't get hammered in redistricting. And so I know we have more work to do. And that is my North Star every day, leading with our values, making sure that everyone feels like the Democratic Party reflects their values and is every single day ensuring that people get a fair shake and making sure that the 2020 election cycle is fair for everybody. Yeah. We fell short on that in 2016. I wasn't here during that period, but I own the consequences of that.
Yeah, and you're doing a very good job of that, Tom. And if I may, just one more uncomfortable conversation, and then we can talk about the wonders of all the Democratic candidates out there. But we haven't talked in a week or three. And a week or so ago, the DNC expelled a couple of, shall we say, Bernie favoring members and replaced them with, shall we say, Hillary favoring members for lack of, shorthand. And one of those guys who got kicked out was James Zogby. This has generated, I think, more commentary in the fora that I frequent than a lot of things. What was this all about?
Jim Zogby, it's interesting. Jim Zogby was an at-large member of the DNC, and Jim Zogby is still an at-large member of the DNC. Tom, I reappointed him. And when you look at the new list of at-large delegates, the DNC chair, when he or she first comes in, has an opportunity to appoint 75 at-large members of the DNC. The way it used to be done was we had it was a closed process. The chair would go into his or her room, come out with a list of people, here you are, accept it. What I did this time was I actually put out a call for people who were interested in doing it. I asked for suggestions. We created a process so that people could offer recommendations. And we got hundreds of folks who expressed interest. I frankly would have been a lot more concerned, Tom, if nobody was interested.
Yeah.
And so we had a supply and demand issue. Jim is still on the DNC as an at-large member. And what's remarkable and what I'm very proud of is we have the most diverse slate of candidates ever. We doubled the number of millennials. We've dramatically expanded the number of Native Americans so that for the first time we can have a Native American council, which has not existed on the DNC. We have the largest union representation that we've had in decades because we were actually losing union representation, and I didn't understand that. We've got to have our labor unions' backs. And so we appointed a remarkable slate. Now, when you get 300 people interested in 75 slots or however many people we had, obviously there's going to be more people disappointed than not.
Right.
And that's a consequence of opening up the process. I'm glad we opened up the process. It gave us enviable dilemmas. We have a dreamer on the DNC, and she just graduated from college, first in her family to do that. She'd love to have that bright future. She has a bright future, but we've got to fight for her. And I thought it was really important to have somebody like Ellie on the DNC. And so, again, when you have a supply and demand problem like we had, yes, you're going to disappoint some people. But if you look at and I never looked at this before I made decisions, but after I heard the concerns, I asked my team to go and look at the list and ask of the at-large appointees.
Tom,
who supported Keith, who supported Tom, and guess what? It was almost identical.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Tom, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the music. I don't think you could either. Well, Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC. Tom, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, it was great to be with you, Tom, and keep up.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Tom, can you hear me very well? Thank you so much. What I was going to tell you, and Tom Perez kind of beat me to it, is that when I went this morning to vote, by 11 o'clock they ran out of ballots. So he just beat me to it. That's what I was trying to let you know. Yeah, in Fairfax, because what he's talking about, that's exactly what I am. So I don't know whether that's something that should concern us, but I think it's a really good thing telling me that more people are going.
Well, the question is Fairfax a predominantly Democratic or Republican district or area?
It's. I'll probably say I'll definitely have to say mixed, because where I am, there's a deep pocket of conservative, because I'm represented by Comstock, and but in some area you still have that Washington, that educated, college graduate, educated individuals who always lean Democratic when it comes to voting. But it's kind of mixed. But the other thing I wanted to tell you about, climate change causes terrorism, and here's the reason why I said that, because I just
climate change what? I'm sorry, I missed a word there.
Cause terrorism.
Causes terrorism. Okay.
And here's what I'm trying to get, because I just read in Le Monde, the French magazine, where they had a journalist basically go to Niger in spite of the situation, and he was with a lot of these terrorists, a lot of these ISIS, and 40% of them are former farmers who put their farming equipment down, and they grab a gun because they said that the area is very hot, they can't grow any crops.
Right.
I mean, this is
what happened in Syria. The over 1.5 million Syrian farmers lost their farms because the desert moved a couple hundred miles south, and which is climate change. And they ended up in Damascus. And then on top of that, there was 1.5 million refugees from Iraq, from George W. Bush's stupid illegal war in Iraq, in Damascus. And so you've got 3 million more people in a city of, I think it's around 8 or 9 million. It's just bursting at the seams. And now the country's in the middle of a civil war. And yeah, it was largely stimulated by climate change.
Yeah, and it's getting hotter and hotter in Africa, and a lot of the people have to basically feed their family, and some of them getting like equivalent of $50 a month to go fight with these ISIS, and they have kids and terrorists. And the problem is, okay, this is an opportunity where you don't apply force to change people's mind. Maybe how about a package from the World Bank or IMF to help that sub-Sahara area so people can have things to do?
How about building infrastructure that doesn't use fossil fuels?
I was just going to say that. Yeah, infrastructure where people can go there and build schools, build roads, and these men will get jobs instead of picking up a gun and getting $50.
Right.
They'll be able to. This is serious. People need to pay attention to little things like this. This can make a difference, you know. And the whole notion that people looking more of like, okay, let's just send in troops or let's send in. It's not. This is not it. If we take a step back and think about little things that we do, I think this place will be living in a very peaceful world, you know.
Yeah.
And it was just interesting, and I just wanted to share that with you, and then your audience, that when you hear people say that terrorism, climate change causes terrorism, that's the perfect example. And I was just shocked when I read the article. I just couldn't believe it.
No, it's well said. Omar, thank you for the call. And interesting about what's going on in Virginia. I mean, if they're out of ballots and it's only 2/3 of the way through the voting day, I'm not sure that's a good sign. Anyhow, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Okay, I started to get into, and I'm going to go back to getting into this international oligarchy alert. Bernie Sanders has warned that the world is, quote, rapidly becoming an international oligarchy, end quote, controlled by a tiny number of billionaires. And the latest revelation of this is the so-called Paradise Papers. Now, I don't know what the reporters at the Süddeutsche Zeitung are doing or how they're doing it, but I am amazed. Süddeutsche Zeitung is, I lived in Germany for a year. I used to read the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Süddeutsche means Southern German. Zeitung means newspaper. It's basically the Southern German news. It's the Bavarian news, essentially. And it's conservative. I mean, this is the region where Hitler came to power, and they have been doing some amazing investigative work. These reporters at the South German newspaper, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, they broke the Panama Papers story a couple of years back, a year or so ago, where now in the Panama Papers story, by the way, they won a Pulitzer Prize for that. They released information about the law firm in Panama that was doing this, and it turns out it was kind of a skeezy law firm. You know, I mean, they were dealing with people who were less than reputable, and they got outed for doing things that were less than legal. So the outing of the Panama Papers actually, led to some substantial collapses, shall we say, on the other side. And now there's a second, and so now instead of a Panamanian law firm that's helping people hide money, they're looking, in this case, at a company called Appleby. Appleby is a law firm, a 119-year-old law firm that caters, to quote Michael Forsythe in today's New York Times, that caters to blue-chip corporations and very wealthy people. They help clients reduce their tax burden. How did we associate the word burden with the word tax in a news story? How about they help clients reduce their taxes, obscure their ownership of assets like companies, private aircraft, real estate, and yachts, and set up huge offshore trusts that in some cases hold billions of dollars. The Süddeutsche Zeitung passed this information along to the ICIJ, which is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. They passed this 13.4 million documents. They've got somebody inside this Bermuda law firm, Applebee's. They've got somebody inside, and they have shared, at least in my opinion, and they have shared this information, the ICIJ, with over 380 journalists from 90 media organizations in 67 countries. And they're going through this information now, and have been for the last 2 days, going through this information and coming up with, whoa, here's what's going on. Now, the thing that's really important to note about the difference between the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers, the Panama Papers, both of them released by the Süddeutsche Zeitung. The Panama Papers being the inside story of how a Panamanian law firm is helping people break the law in some cases in order to avoid paying taxes. In the case of Applebee's, in case of the Paradise Papers, what they're documenting is how a law firm in Bermuda is helping people avoid taxes while not breaking the law. And in some ways, this is even more distressing, because what these Paradise Papers are showing is how easy it is for extremely rich people to avoid paying any taxes at all or to radically minimize their taxes. Some of the people who have been outed by this, Yuri Milner, this guy who he's had hundreds of millions of dollars that came out of Kremlin-associated organizations. It came from VTB, a bank controlled by the Russian state. And with that money, he bought a good chunk of Twitter and Facebook. Mr. Milner is also an investor in Cadre, a New York-based real estate technology company founded by Jared Kushner, and handling hundreds of millions of dollars of Russian money. Now, I don't see that as necessarily a horrible thing, but it might be. I mean, who knows what this Apple, again, you know, just because money comes from a particular country, you know, let's find out what the real association is. Apple, its chief executive Tim Cook said the company just doesn't stash money in a Caribbean island. Well, you know, Apple was running this tax scam out of Ireland. And then the British or the European Union said, Ireland, you can't do that anymore, right? You're hurting all of us. So Ireland did away with the tax scam. And so what did Apple do? Well, this is right after Tim Cook said, we don't stash money on a Caribbean island. Instead, they went to an island in the English Channel. $128 billion stashed overseas to avoid paying taxes in the United States. Edward Kleinbard, a former corporate tax advisor to such companies, says, quote, U.S. multinational firms are the global grand masters of tax avoidance schemes. We know now that Wilbur Ross invested in a shipping company whose top clients include a Russian law firm, a firm connected by an oligarch facing sanctions, and Vladimir Putin's son-in-law, Navigator Holdings. We'll see where that goes. Mossack Fonseca was the company in Panama that got busted. But Applebee's is offering tax havens all around the world, the BVI, Caymans, the Isle of Man, etc.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the New York Times notes, Americans, companies, and people dominate the list of clients. Fascinating stuff. We'll be right back.
We're reading today from Jesse Eisinger's new book, shall we call it the Chicken Poop Club? Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. This is from the introduction. It's from page 15 in the introduction. Boom, bust, and crackdown. America's economic history is unfolded in a series of booms followed by busts, followed crucially by crackdowns. After the stock market crash of 1929, congressional hearings channeled public outrage and resulted in landmark laws regulating Wall Street and creating the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. A few years later, a new SEC helped put the head of the mighty New York Stock Exchange in prison. Though inconsistent, the SEC over the intervening decades emerged as one of the most respected government regulatory bodies. The SEC is the most important corporate regulator, overseeing publicly traded companies in the nation's capital markets, money markets. The agency has civil powers, must team up with the various offices of the Justice Department when a securities laws violation turns into a criminal investigation. After the go-go years of the late 1960s, the SEC worked closely with the Southern District to take on top law firms, top accounting firms, and top executives who had helped perpetrate corporate frauds. After the savings and loan scandals of the 1980s, when hundreds of small banks across the country failed due to reckless real estate loans, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 1,000 people, including top executives of many of the largest failed banks. After the Michael Milken-run junk bomb boom and blow-up of the late 1980s, prosecutors spent years digging up evidence of stock manipulation and insider trading at major investment banks and law firms, prosecuting some of the most powerful Wall Street figures of the era. In the early 2000s, the NASDAQ bubble burst. The burst NASDAQ bubble revealed a corporate book-cooking pandemic. Top officers from giants such as Enron, WorldCom, Quest Communications, Adelphia, and Tyco International ended up in prison. Recklessness and stupidity fuel booms, but usually so do crimes. By contrast, after the 2008 financial crisis, the government failed. In response to the worst calamity to hit capital markets and the global economy since the Great Depression, the government did not charge any top bankers. The public was furious. Bank bailouts and a lack of consequences for banksters radicalized both ends of the political spectrum and gave rise to two of the most potent social movements of our time, Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Anger about the lack of Wall Street accountability seeded disenchantment with Obama. The 2016 insurgency of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who challenged frontrunner Hillary Clinton almost to the doors of the Democratic Convention, demonstrated the anger that remained on the left years after the apex of the crisis, undergirding mistrust about Clinton. She had given friendly, fateful, and highly compensated speeches to investment banks. While a Republican president had presided over the crisis, and a Democratic one had saved the financial system, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Democrats could not claim to be the protectors of the working class and the scourges of investment bankers. That was due in large measure to the lack of corporate prosecutions. According to the Wall Street Journal, analysis of 156 criminal and civil cases brought by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission against 10 of the largest banks on Wall Street since 2009, in 81% of the cases, the government neither charged nor even identified individual employees. In the remainder, the government only charged 47 low and mid-level employees. Merely one was a boardroom-level executive whom the SEC charged civilly rather than criminally. In his own incoherent and superficial ways, Donald Trump rode anger about Wall Street throughout his campaign, railing at the bank's power. He closed his campaign by hinting poisonously about a cabal of global bankers rigging the system. He assailed politicians who were owned by Goldman Sachs, Trump's word. His first Ted Cruz in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general. The Republican platform called for breaking up the big banks by returning to the Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that splits commercial bank from investment banking, a reflection of resentment about the government bailout of the financial system as the bankers wriggled free. No sooner had Trump taken office, though, than he rushed to stuff members of that cabal into his White House and cabinet. He and Goldman alumni who advised him moved within days of taking office to unravel Dodd-Frank and loosen restrictions on corporations generally. It's commonplace to observe that no top bankers from the top financial firms went to prison for the widespread malfeasance that led to the 2008 financial crisis. It's such a socially acceptable opinion that no less than an inside-the-beltway figure than the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said, after he was safely out of office, that more bankers should have gone to prison. The problem is worse than that. Today's Justice Department has lost the will and indeed the ability to go after the highest level corporate wrongdoers. The problem did not begin in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, and it has not ended. Prosecutors don't simply struggle to put executives for too big to fail banks in prison. They also cannot hold accountable wrongdoing executives from a gamut of large corporations, from pharmaceutical to technology to large industrial operations to retail giants. And, the book goes on from there, laying out exactly who and how and why. It's extraordinary. The Chicken Beep Club. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you over Think Progress. There, somebody has been watching Fox News. Things never turn out well when that happens. And Representative Kevin Brady, a Republican from Texas, was on with Bill Hemmer, who was asking him, is everybody going to get a tax cut? And, of course, everybody's not going to get a tax cut. In fact, under this new Republican bill, by 2028, when the selling features are gone, the real stuff kicks in, and more than half of American working class people are going to see their taxes go up. By 2030, it'll be like 3/4 of American working people will see their taxes go up. So what did Representative Kevin Brady say about that? He said, well, you have to look at the unique situation. What Joint Committee confirmed yesterday is, yes, the design of this, because it isn't just about the rates, it's about cutting taxes underneath those rates as well. People are better off. In other words, so you're making $20,000 a year and your taxes just went up because of the Republicans. That's a good thing for you. Say the Republicans. I saw an ad on TV last night saying that as a working American, I was going to get a $2,000 tax cut out of the Republicans. It's a lie. I mean, we were sitting there watching this, and I was just like, I can't believe they just said that. And Louise said, they're lying. And I'm like, they do that a lot in political advertising, if you've noticed. David in Portland, Oregon. Hey, David, it says here there was a shooting in Portland today?
Yeah, up by PSU.
What happened?
The Oregon Live website doesn't actually have a whole heck of a lot of details. I just wanted to give a local update that the violence is pretty much running rampant, and it's just one more day on it.
So, but we don't know if how many people were injured or anything?
Just one.
Just one. I see.
It wasn't a mass shooting. It was just a shooting.
Yeah.
One person dead.
Yeah. Well, that literally happens several times every day in the United States, and all the more the shame. But, David, thanks for the heads up. I'll keep an eye on the story. I appreciate that. Red in Seattle, Washington. Hey, Red, what's up?
Hey, I was just listening to your interview with Tom Perez, and I just want to know why the Democrats claim to be the party of working people, why they still support capitalism.
I'm of the opinion that regulated capitalism can actually work to the benefit of working people. It certainly did from 1935 to 1982.
Maybe for white Americans.
Well,
you can by white people.
You can make that case, Red, and I don't disagree with you. That was a period when, when the white middle class grew pretty rapidly, but so did the black middle class, particularly post 1960.
Well, in some ways, but
that
doesn't really matter right now because we still have a corrupt two-party capitalist system.
Yeah, but the corruption of the corruption of politics and the corruption inherent in a capitalist political and economic system is not necessarily racism. Now, racism has been part of that. I mean, capitalism, the most extreme thing that a capitalist society can do is endorse the ownership of slaves. So
Malcolm X said, "You can't be a capitalist without being a racist."
Yeah, and I would say that the arrow of causation moves in the other direction. That you could be a capitalist and not be a racist, but it's hard to be a racist and not be a capitalist, at least if you're advocating for slavery. Slavery is capitalism's biggest failure.
Well, here's my question. What's the difference between wage slavery and just chattel slavery. I mean, capitalism depends on exploitation. So I just want to know what you think capitalism actually is.
Well, that's a great question, Red, and that's where we get down to the real essence of this. I mean, capitalism is an economic system that allows people to use their own capital to invest in businesses, presumably to make money over time and to do other things. That in and of itself is not corrupt. It's how you define the rules of that capitalism. If one of the rules is that people can make money by owning other people, then that's clearly corrupt capitalism. If one of those rules is that you can make money by poisoning Americans with your herbicides and pesticides, and you can buy politicians to keep allowing that to happen, that's a failure of capitalism. But that's also a failure of regulation. And this is where, my point, that I think that regulated capitalism can be functional. And the problem that you have with absenting capitalism from the entire scene altogether is what we saw with the Soviet Union. If you get rid of all of the ability of individuals to act as autonomous economic actors, the ability of individuals to make their own decisions economically for themselves, their families, and their businesses. When you do that, somebody else is making those decisions. And as we saw in the Soviet Union, as we saw in Cuba, as we saw in China, the group that makes those decisions becomes the government, the group that has the guns, the group that has the jails, the group that has the power.
I'm not going to get into debate about the Soviet Union.
Well, if you're talking about doing away with capitalism, you have to. Because that was, to the best of my knowledge, that was the first time that capitalism was completely done away with in an entire country for a period of decades.
It was also under attack for, 70, 80 years. Because that society wasn't allowed to develop under natural circumstances. They were constantly under attack.
By whom?
Well, by Western powers.
Are you talking about World War II? Russia won the Soviet Union won World War II. They didn't lose it.
That's right. That's right. But you remember that the United States invaded the Soviet Union.
When?
Before Stalin took power.
I don't think so. I don't think that we have. Red, I'm gonna have to move along. This conversation is kind of going in circles, and you're tossing out stuff that I don't believe is true. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, if the United States had invaded the Soviet Union, let me know. But I'm pretty sure it never happened. Richard in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
Well, hi. Actually, we sent Marines there, I think, in 1917, but it wasn't.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I think we sent Marines there in 1917, I think, or 1919, I don't know what. But the reason I called was about the endless gun debate, and we're not. Boy, what's happened. The trouble, I had it all planned. I was going to say, but there's always so much interesting stuff that it diverts me. But I think that the gun debate is never going to go away. I mean, if we can let these kids be killed in Newtown, and what we've seen, so many times in the last month. We're not winning, right? And it occurred to me that really the Republicans really don't even care about whether people have the Second Amendment or not, because after all, you can't go in with a bump stock and sit in the gallery in the Congress or in the at the White House or at the Supreme Court with a gun like that. Right. Now it's taboo, right? So, but they don't really give a damn about the Second Amendment. I think the whole debate has to be framed because I'm sick of talking about how many shots they can get off and all that. This whole debate is a boon for the Republicans, and it ought to always be framed that this is something that they won't do anything about because they benefit from it politically, and they don't give a darn about how many people are killed. And that's Absolutely. The whole way this thing has to be debated from now on. No more, does it have a bayonet lug on it? Does it have a different stock or whatever? This is manna for them. This is.
No, I agree, Richard. And the Republicans are doing. It's too early to talk about the people who were killed in Texas. Well, let's talk about the people who were killed in the Pulse nightclub. Let's talk about the people who were killed. I mean, pick your mass shooting. But number one, yes, promote the fact that the Republicans don't give a rat's ass about human beings dying in the United States. They really don't care. Profit is more important to them. And number two, very simple, registration, licensure, and insurance. What we do with cars. If we did that with guns, I am convinced that this whole debate would just dissolve. Richard, thank you for the call. Well said. Lou in Grandview, Indiana. Hey, Lou, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just watching you earlier today, last hour, and how frustrated you seemed to be about some of the people you were talking to. And the week before that, I was listening to you, and your supposition was that Americans were ignorant, they were uninformed.
And malinformed.
Or misinformed, or malinformed.
Yeah.
And I guess on some level I agree with you, but actually I believe that Americans are stupid because they have no reason to comprehend anything. And just like the argument you just had with your gun stuff, I mean, that's all common sense and reasonable. But if you can't comprehend that, then that is ignorance because that's on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because I know when I was in the fourth grade, I was an ADHD kid, so I had to take we're about the same age, but in my school I had to take I think it was called an SRA or something like that. And anyway, it was a special reading program because my comprehension was about 0.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I learned to learn was because I was able to finally slow down and learn how to read and comprehend what I had read. And to this day, I still read with the dictionary right by me,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And so, but this idea that it's just like the stupid tax thing. You got all this information out there, and if people can't comprehend that 12 is greater than 10 or 25 is greater than 15,
it's virtually an industry, Lou, making fun of Americans' lack of information and knowledge. But it's not unique to the United States. It's happening all over the world. Although our media has been particularly hard on us, shall we say. Lou, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, and maybe we can get Tom Perez back on, find out exactly what elections are happening today, what people should be doing. Stick around. And welcome back. Barbara in Seattle, Washington, listening to KBCS. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind?
Hello, this is Barbara, and I'm just calling because I don't think people understand two basic laws of physics, that you get what you subsidize, and for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. This country spends all its federal tax dollars on bombs, and local and state government spend all their money subsidizing billionaires. I'm in Seattle, and the so-called liberals, the neocon liberal Democrats, have been hiding all the subsidies for Amazon and Boeing, and like $10 billion for Boeing from the state, and $1 billion for Amazon just in the last year for a electric transformer in their area.
Right.
And, the Municipal Ownership League took over Seattle in 1911 to make the port and the public utilities work for the average worker and the average homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been living on all that, and we gave away our storm sewers to the suburbs. We subsidized the freeways, and I worked in the Democratic Party to stop all the parks from being paved. But anyway, I failed in most of my efforts. And what I'm trying to say is that until people understand that we've met the enemy and it is us, the pogo politics, we can't start solving any problems. People ought to buy the record from the Capitol steps. We arm the world. How are people surprised when the only way poor people can get an education in this country is to join the Army and be trained to kill. Every federal tax dollar that's spent goes to bombs because $700 billion.
It's not every, Barbara.
Okay,
it's not every.
Okay,
it's more than half of our national budget. But there's a real point here that you're making, Barbara, that I think needs to be held up and that or examined. And this is something that back years ago on this program when Bernie used to be on every Friday and take calls from listeners for an hour, he addressed there was I think it was when Boeing was shopping around for a new headquarters. And they were saying to states and municipalities around the United States, how much money are you going to give us if we move there? And you had, several different states offering, well, we'll give you $300 million in free taxes and free land. Oh, we'll give you $500 million. No, we'll give you $1 billion. And it was unseemly and it's destructive to communities. And frankly, it's not good for business. And Bernie suggested that any state that participates, because you can't regulate the corporations, right? But you can regulate the states. Any state that participates in a process where they're competing with other states by giving away federal or state assets, tax money, land, whatever, would cause that state to lose their federal highway funding for a year. And that could shut down this whole process of companies exploiting states. Amazon is doing it right now. It would be a really good thing. Thom Perez coming up right after this. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Thom Perez on the line with us, the chair of the DNC. And Thom, welcome back to the program.
Hey, since I saw you last, I went and voted.
Hey, good on you.
Absolutely. Everybody needs to do that. So if your listeners are out there in a jurisdiction that has an election, get out there. And in particular,
yeah, well, I was just saying a minute ago.
Or New Jersey, you better get out there.
Yeah, I was just saying this on the air a second ago that I had this conversation with you earlier in the hour, and we never really got to a good summary of all the things that Democrats across the country should know about in regard to today's election day. Is there election happening near you? Should you be getting out right now? So do you have, I'm assuming, I hope, that you have a list of some sort that you can share with us?
Absolutely. No, we've got a remarkable amount of elections. People tend to focus only on Virginia and New Jersey, and there's undeniably important elections there, an opportunity to send a real message that dividers like Donald Trump and Ed Gillespie don't belong in the governor's residence, and uniters like Ralph Northam in Virginia and Phil Murphy in New Jersey should be the people who we should elect. And I feel cautiously optimistic about both, but people got to get out and vote. We've also got some really important races elsewhere. I was out campaigning for a woman named Maka Dhingra in Washington State. Senate District 45 is metropolitan Seattle, and the reason this is such an important race, the reason why we invested in it heavily, was because if we win that seat today, we flip the state Senate in Washington State, and we already have the state House, and we have a remarkable governor in Jay Inslee. That's how you move forward as Democrats, by doing things like that. There are key mayoral elections in St. Petersburg, Florida, Syracuse, New York, Manchester, New Hampshire. In St. Petersburg, Mayor Rick Kreisman, just talked to him yesterday, is in a campaign where they're attacking him because he's tried to do well by workers. God forbid. In Syracuse, New York, we have a remarkable opportunity, and we've been investing there as well to elect the first Latina. Actually, the first Latina mayor in the history of New York State, it would be.
Whoa.
Juanita Perez Williams, a remarkable figure. She was told in high school by her counselors, "You're not going to amount to anything." And not only did she prove them wrong, going to law school, becoming an officer in the military, but she is just a leader, plain and simple. Manchester, New Hampshire, we've invested there to help Joyce Craig. Charlotte, North Carolina, big race there today. Vi Lyles is running, and she's been outspent by her opponent, who's getting a lot of money that is kind of dark money. But you know what? She's running a great campaign, and I feel very optimistic about her. And those are examples of races that we are engaged in. In the state of Virginia, there are all the House of Delegates are up today, and there's 100 seats. And I think we can make real progress. We usually only field, at least in the last 4 or 5 cycles, we've only fielded roughly 45 Democrats or so. So to put it differently, Tom, we ceded all the other seats to the Republicans, and that's not a way to win elections.
Yeah.
This year we have 88 candidates in the House of Delegates. I think that's a key weapon at our disposal. I was campaigning for a number of them over the weekend. We have the opportunity to elect the first 2 Latinas to the House of Delegates. We have other candidates there that are spectacular, and I think we're going to make progress in taking back the House. We've got to win 17 seats, and I don't know how far we'll get tonight, but I think we're going to get a really, really good turnout there. So elections matter, and the new DNC we're focused on helping to elect Democrats up and down the ticket. You know, frankly, the old DNC, Tom, was just focused on the presidency every 4 years, and that's not who we are now. We're about helping to elect Democrats everywhere. That's why we invested in all of these races. We invested in special elections earlier this year where we were able to win seats in Oklahoma. We won 3 state legislative seats in Oklahoma. We won a seat in Iowa, another state legislative seat, a state Senate seat in New Hampshire that had been Republican since 1984, a state Senate seat in Florida that the Republican won double digits last year. A seat came open, and we won that. The common denominator in all of these, good candidates, very clear message of fighting for education, fighting for health care, fighting for opportunity, and boots on the ground, organizing. That's the new DNC.
Yeah, and it's not even these kind of top-line races. A friend of mine, Garland Gilchrist II, is running for city clerk of Detroit. And he's got this huge group of volunteers working with him, and he's really out there doing, just great stuff. And Garland is a great candidate. And there's city clerk, right? I mean, there's so many of these people out there.
Well, the outpouring of people willing to step up and run for office has been one of the most inspiring aspects of 2017. Yeah. I see it everywhere I go, Tom. And these are candidates. Again, the Virginia example I gave you, 88 Democrats running. Now, we're not going to win 88 seats in Virginia, but what we've done is generate excitement in districts where Democrats, frankly, have been absent. Yeah. And so we're going to generate turnout, and I'm sure we're going to score a number of upset victories there because we have great candidates, and the divisive campaign in Virginia that's been run by Ed Gillespie is shameful. He's it's the dog whistle phase of the campaign. He's been using these dark immigrant ads that make it sound like it's the next coming. A number of voter suppression tactics.
Tom, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're hitting the top of the hour here. I'm running out of show. So, Thom Perez, head of the DNC. Tom,
get out and vote.
There you go. At Thom Perez on Twitter and, of course, Democrats.org. Thank you, Tom. Great talking with you. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, including you. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. Get out to vote. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. on the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.